Today we dive into the lore of the Oblivion crisis, when the sky itself cracked open and Tamriel faced the unthinkable. Discover how a hidden cult, a stolen amulet, and a reluctant heir collided to decide the fate of every mortal soul. The tension of cities engulfed in living fire, and the triumph that reshaped the very fabric of reality. Now let us begin. In the soft hush of the late Third Era, while the imperial banners still fluttered in reassuring rhythm above the white gold tower, there grew beneath the veneer of ordered peace a slow, secret murmur. In dusty cellars beneath the inns of coral, in smoke-laden counting rooms along the Green Emperor Way, in half-abandoned watchforts where moonlight crept through arrow slits, small gatherings repeated fragments of scripture that were older than the empire itself. By guttering candle flame, they spoke of dawn and dusk, in one breath of fire uncontained, and of a prince who once raised cities in the dawn of recorded time. These whispers, scarcely louder than the crackle of tallow, belonged to the mythic dawn, a cult that professed devotion to Marin's Dagon and heralded a sundering yet to come. Their existence did not burst upon the empire all at once. Rather, it seeped like groundwater through cracked foundations, patient and sure, seeking the moment when river and tide would meet. Many chroniclers trace the earliest seed of the crisis to the writings of a single man who by birth stood only on the fringes of Cyrodiilic nobility. Menker Camoran Menka, Camoran, for the clarity of spoken recounting, was the son of Haemon Camoran, the so-called Camoran usurper who drenched Valenwood and Calovia in 2 decades of civil war. Haemon's defeat at the hands of a coalition of Breton and Calovian powers left his surviving heir a pariah. Monkar's childhood was thus spent in flight, his tutors dispersed, his shelter borrowed from sympathizers too fearful to name him openly. Yet it was in that itinerant exile that he discovered a curious volume, tucked away among the Camoran dynasty's hereditary libraries, a brittle, moth-eaten manuscript attributed to Maurian Zenas, the famed transliminal scholar, whose treatise on Oblivion described ventures into Daedric realms and the fluidity of their geometries. Zenas's prose planted something within young Menker that neither sorrow nor hunger could uproot, an unflinching fascination with realms beyond mortal. Ken, by his 20th winter, Keener had outpaced the itinerant priests who attempted to reclaim his faith for Geoffrey or Zenithor. He vanished for years into northern Valenwood's labyrinthine heart, returning only periodically to barter rare orchids or meteor silver curios for fresh vellum and ink. The fragments he drafted during those hermetic seasons formed the nucleus of a grander text that he eventually named the Mysterium Xarxes. To outside eyes, the title appeared a plagiarisms, Arxes being the ultimary divine scribe of Aetherius, but the work itself was no mere imitation. It was, as forensic arcanists later attested, living grimoire, a codex whose pages shifted with lunar tide and auroral flare, mending their arrangement whenever the constellations realigned. Menker claimed that the tome had been dictated directly by the Prince of Destruction. Whether that assertion was metaphor or literal voice in the mind, none can confirm. But the result was a scripture that fused Cameron royal myth, allied star practice, and a razor-edged repudiation of the Alessian dragonfires. To understand why such a text could take root, one must look beyond its author and into the fault lines of the empire itself. The Third Empire of Men, though outwardly strong, bore cracks that spiderwebbed from its founding moment. Saint Alessia's covenant with Akatosh had, in mythic terms, secured Mundus from the ravening forces of Oblivion by way of dragonfire and dragon blood. Yet the covenant held an unspoken cost. It privileged a linear stability over the creative chaos that some faiths in particular certain. Bosemary Greenspoke writes, and the old allied despot cult had once celebrated as sacred. When Talos Tiber Septime reforged the covenant for his own dynasty, mented that stability beneath a veneer of human ascendancy. For elves dispossessed since the fall of the White Towers, for beastfolk perpetually suspect within Cyrodiilic borders, and for men whose memories of reachfolk autonomy still whispered in bone, the pact looked less like divine benevolence and more like a cage of stone and law. The mythic Dawn capitalized upon these simmering resentments. They did not proselytize in public squares, where the Legion's armored boots echoed. Instead, they approached the disaffected through coded pamphlets, copied on Dawn pink paper, distributed by silent agents who traded no names. Within the provinces, the cult adapted its message to local grievances. In the Reach, they spoke of liberation from Septime shackles. In Valenwood, they referenced the Green Pack's chains of survival, promising deserts of new growth once the old covenant burned. Hammerful, they whispered of red sands untainted by foreign code. Every promise, however cloaked in local dialect, converged upon the same refrain. When the dragonfires guttered, dawn would break anew, and Maroon's Dagon would reshape the cracked jewel of mist, Mundus, into a realm where the faithful might carve their own dominions. Within Cyrodiil proper, the cult's operations wore an even subtler mask. They embedded themselves among imperial scholarship, particularly within universities where the study of Dawn-era myth could be passed off as venerable antiquarian pursuit. The arcane university's lower stacks hosted volumes long thought inert. Morihouse's Flight Chronicle or the Partial Annals of Nir and Thand. It was among these that mythic Dawn operatives slipped small slips of vellum-bearing fire sigils, invisible to the casual eye. Only those who had previously been vetted by an acolyte and taught the corresponding candelash wash could reveal the address to the next clandestine convocation. The Imperial Library is preoccupied with cataloging the far more dangerous Thalmor revisions of Aldmori creation doctrine, failed to notice the rising tide of restricted texts quietly vanishing into private holdings. At the cult's apex sat Manker, Comoron, styling himself master only within the confines of his crimson sanctums. Rumor paints him as a gaunt figure wreathed in flame-motif robes, golden torque at his throat, voice smooth and deliberate. Yet the more revealing aspect lay not in his attire, but in the unyielding certainty with which he described cosmic architecture. The Mysterium Xarxis framed the Mundus as an inherently flawed bastion of stasis, an echo of the Orbis whose innate contradictions light and void. Uno and Paduma had been falsely resolved by Akatosh's linear imposition. To Comoran, the Dragonfires were not guardians, but jailers, binding mortal potential within a timeline as brittle as burnished glass. To break them, one must first unbind the amulet of kings the Chimel Adabal, which he referred to with Nir. Reverence as the red jewel, the blood of divines made crystal. Without that locus of covenantal power, the liminal barrier would falter, and the realm of change could again bleed into the world. The question often posed by later historians is why Maroon's Dagon aligned himself with a scholarly malcontent, when his own incursive history suggested he required no mortal intermediary. The answer lies in the changing nature of a prince's agency. During the Dawn and Merethic eras, Dagon's assaults were raw. Tectonic events, sinking of Mournhold, raising of Ald Sotha, the cataclysmic fervor of Varden. But as the wheel of convention spun, and the structure of Mundus calcified, the Dedra found their reach increasingly curtailed by mythic inertia and the Dragonfire barrier. Direct assault became less effective. Mortal loopholes grew more attractive. Cameron, possessed of Dragontongue scholarship and resentment sharpened by exile, offered precisely the pivot Dagon required. Through him, Dagon discovered not merely a servant, but a vessel capable of opening the gates from within, circumventing the covenant in a fashion no prior legion of Dedra had achieved. By the time Emperor Uriel Septim VII entered his 6th decade, the cult's infiltration had reached surprising breadth. Rank-and-file legionaries were rare among its devotees' loyalty oaths, retained some potency, but quartermasters and scribes were another matter. A supply clerk at the Wannon Priory Armory arranged to mislabel deliveries so that crates of Dedric embers masqueraded as alchemical reagents, ultimately shipped to remote caves along the Panther River. In Anvil, a minor customs magistrate falsified charter logs to conceal the arrival of dawn-marked vessels bearing strange coral from Thras, which cult artificers would later grind to powder for use in portal stabilizers. Such officials often justified their complicity by telling themselves they pursued hidden wisdom rather than treason. It was the genius of Mankar's rhetoric that he rarely spoke of violence. He spoke of inevitability, of a restoration of cosmic Equilibrium. Actual plans for bloodshed remained compartmentalized among inner circles known as the commentaries. The commentaries themselves, 4 scrolls penned in Mankar's meticulous Ephesian hand, served a dual purpose. At first reading they appeared riddlesome, a swarm of metaphors describing twisted towers of glass, 8 doors that opened inside, the reader's skull, and rivers that flowed from Niran into suns. Yet each scroll masked an algorithm of ciphers, by reciting specific stanzas under precise lunar alignments. Initiates could superimpose the paternoster of Dagonic syllables onto the topography of Cyrodiil, revealing map glyphs that pointed to hidden shrines. In this manner, the cult enforced ideological filtration. Only those patient enough to decode the text and disciplined enough to perform the lunar recitations advanced to the deeper mysteries. Reports recovered by the Blades after the crisis speak of aspirants who spent a decade on the first scroll alone, their lives gradually consumed by the pursuit, so that by the time they knelt within the flickering torchlight of a subterranean shrine they were already bound in mind and purpose. One such shrine, later unearthed beneath Lake Arius, became the de facto heart of cult operations. From the outside it resembled only a fissure in slate-gray stone, little different from the countless caves where bandits stowed contraband. Within, however, corridors spiraled around polished obsidian spires, lit by an unnatural rose glow. The inner sanctum stood a basin constantly aflame, yet the flame bore petals of cold light rather than heat. Those who approached swore they felt gravity skew, as though the air itself bent toward some unseen horizon. Here Mankar read from the Xerxes, and here his closest acolytes practiced the art of walking between waking and dusk-short distance. Metaphysical leaps that foreshadowed the eventual opening of full Oblivion gates. Despite Imperial intelligence's wide-flung net, tangible evidence of the cult's growth remained elusive. The Blades numbered fewer than 300 across the provinces, and their directives ranged from Thalmor espionage to Orcish clan disputes. Each time rumors surfaced, such as the disappearance of the minor noble Estinia Belit, last seen at a symposium on Dawn-era linguistics, the leads fizzled before agents could confirm. Senior Blade Captain Stefan would later lament that Cameron's genius lay in making heresy look like scholarship, until the very moment daggers flashed in torchlight. Nor were the Elder Council's attentions free to focus solely on clandestine cults. The simulacrum of Yagratharn, a decade earlier, had wounded public trust and strained the Empire's coffers. Provincial tensions simmered anew. Skyrim's Jarls argued tariffs with Cyrodiil's grain magnates. Morrowind's Ordinators demanded greater autonomy in policing smuggling routes. Blackmarsh threatened to close its borders after yet another raid on an Argonian mission by Dunmary Dre's slavers. In such an atmosphere, whispers of a fringe sect worshipping a destroyer god seemed to many counselors a negligible threat compared to trade embargoes or legion desertions on the Elsewhere frontier. Thus the stage set. Maroon's Dagon watched through the shimmer of his realm, waiting for the precise calendric hinge when Mundus's star-wrought shell thinned. It arrived in the year 3E 433. During the conjunction of the 2 moon secunda occluding Masar in an eclipse rare enough that scribes rifled through Riemann archives to find the last instance. Astrologically, the eclipse mattered less than the psychic resonance it produced within the perceptual field of Nirn, the moons. Being pieces of Lorcan's sundered divine heart, share harmonic sympathy with all acts of liminal transgression. When they aligned, the veil rippled. When they parted, it trembled. Kamaran, versed in these cycles, timed his assault to fall upon the night when the moons remained darkest. What transpired below the Imperial City's dungeons on that night is known only in reconstruction for most. Witnesses perished. Uriel Septine VII, accompanied by a small contingent of his personal blades, left his chambers under cover of secrecy. Intending to escort an unknown guest, later believed to be the last of his mist-hidden heirs beyond. The city, via a hidden sewer route, the Mythic Dawn, having infiltrated the palace guard through a single turncoat named Captain Renault, sprang their ambush within a subterranean corridor, whose wet bricks still bore the mortar seal of the Alessian Purge. The moment blade met flesh, the theological covenant that tethered the amulet of kings to Alessia's dragon blood wavered. In that instant of metaphysical slack, a ripple of dawning fire shuddered through the soul of Nirn. Too subtle for ordinary senses, yet sufficient for the Prince of Destruction to taste, Uriel fell, this blood soaking the unfinished pages of a memoir he carried for distant keepsake, but not before thrusting the amulet into the hands of a prisoner unknown to history before that hour a prisoner, whose destiny would soon intertwine with Martin Septime's own. Cameron's agents withdrew into the catacombs, leaving behind only silence, fading torch glow, and the echo of a crumbling covenant. High above, in the Temple of the One, the dragon fires flickered, though the temple custodians insisted all proceeded. According to ritual, eyewitnesses later confessed they saw the flame dim by a fraction, as if a breath of frost had licked along the edges of Akatosh's eternal blaze. Within days, the news broke across the provinces. The emperor was dead. Heirs presumed slain. The Elder Council assumed provisional rule, gathering an emergency conclave to stabilize the line of succession. Yet already their deliberations were haunted by premonitions. Ships leaving Anvil reported nightmares stalking the horizon, silhouettes of burnt copper battlements glimpsed when lightning forked. Hunters near Coral found deer carcasses strangely desiccated, as though drained of hearthfire rather than blood. A Breton hedge mage traveling the Gold Road told of hearing bells tolling beneath the soil at dawn. Were omens, though few, yet saw them as such. Even within these pre-crisis stirrings, the mythic dawn did not rest. They intensified recruitment, emboldened by the destruction of imperial certainty. One charismatic adept known as Raven Camerano, blood relative to Menker, but granted the surname to signify inner circle status, traveled the Nibene Basin by skiff, distributing lockets of starlight glass said to repel legion scrying. In Central, far across Topal Sea, emissaries offered quartermasters crates of Moonsager in exchange for legion schedule manifests. Gold changed hands, secrets flowed into hidden inkwells, and the cult's plan reached its penultimate arrangement. Crucial among these final measures was the forging of sigil stones, crystalline anchors shaped from the boiling heart matter of Dagon's Deadlands. Stone bore weeping fissures that pulsed with ember light, and each resonated with a specific attunement frequency to a target location within Mundus. Monkar's artificers, some Bosmeri tree shapers, turned iconoclast. Others, Altmeri grafters estranged from Somerset's old ways, bound these stones into the skeletal frames of gate apertures. Several prototypes failed catastrophically, carving momentary vacuums that imploded shrines and devoured acolytes alike. Those failures only refined the equation until a stable aperture held long enough for the charred wind of Oblivion to seep through without shredding local reality. To each success, the cult mapped more of Cyrodiil, plotting which city walls would first feel the kiss of dawn-red sky. Looming over every logistical triumph was the great sigil stone. Oh. The keystone that would anchor a gate of unprecedented scale, a gate not merely to raid but to serve as fulcrum for a permanent merger of realms. Forged in the heart of Dagon's flagship fortress, known to some cartomancers as the Havoc Wellhead, the stone required a sacrifice of both mortal and dead quintessence in equal ratio. The mortal element came willingly from Cameron's own bloodline, for he offered what remained of his kin-distant cousins, clinging to the last tattered threads of Cameron dignity. The Daedric essence was supplied by Valkinazin, one of Dagon's 4 scorched generals, who bled cinder oil into the lattice. In that forging, Camoran's intentions fused with Dagon's appetites, producing a relic capable of prying Mundus wide. Yet before any gate could yawn, the Amulet of Kings remained absent from Camoran's grasp. Without it, the dragon fires still. Flickered guardians failing, yes, but not extinguished. The cult dispatched their brightest silencers to track down the unknown prisoner who fled the palace with the relic. Meanwhile, Manker withdrew to finalize a sanctuary beyond sanctuary, a pocket realm he named Paredes Paratus, for gentle syllabary, where he invited only the most exalted converts. This realm, grown from the folding of Etherean ley and Deadlands stone, awaited the hour when Camoran would break the world's dawn and crown himself its mythic sovereign. He would reside there inviolate, shielded from the ruin he orchestrated, stepping forth only to claim the ashes. Thus, by invisible strands strung across the hills of Tamriel, the conspiracy reached maturity. The cult had wormed into courier relays, supply depots, seafaring manifests, and even the dreams of mendicant prophets who wandered Bravel's alleyways muttering of rubies aflame. All that remained were a handful of precise strokes. Retrieve the amulet. Silence potential heirs, and tear the first fissure in the skein between realms. Unknown to the faithful, however, a spark born of the dragon blood still wandered the wilds, clothed in simple priestly garb and unaware of the lineage humming in his veins. And so the opposing vector's destruction and fragile hopes led inexorably toward one another. Like tectonic plates gathering unseen force beneath a placid sea, it is in the collision of these forces that the Oblivion crisis would truly ignite. For now, in this opening cadence, we find the Empire lulled by routine, its guardians blinking awake to uncertain dawns, its populace carrying on with market chatter and hearth liturgies. Yet beneath their cobblestones and behind their prayer book margins, crimson glyphs already glowed. Within weeks, the first gate would flare at Kavoch, and the world would learn that the dragonfires, for all their ancient promise, could indeed fall silent. But on this eve the promise lingers, trembling like a candle's last upright flame before the draft. The pieces are in motion, the silent galleries filled with watchers. And the breath of Dagon gathers heat just beyond the mortal horizon, waiting for the moment to roar into being. Only hours had passed since the Emperor's lifeblood stained the moss-licked stone beneath the imperial city, yet time itself already seemed altered. Dawn came late, as if the sun hesitated behind the Gerald peaks, unwilling to pour gold upon a realm suddenly fragile. On the temple aisle, keepers of the One stood in silent rows before the dragonfires, watching embers dance with a tremor that none of them had witnessed in their long custodianship. The flame still burned, but its tongue curved inward, shrinking toward the basin's silver lip, as though some invisible wind strove to snuff it from within. High prefects exchanged troubled glances, remembering doctrines that spoke of covenantal slack. The moment when Akatosh's binding sigil could no longer cling with perfect certainty to the blood of kings across the cobbled bridges. Ere the elder council gathered beneath a chamber still heavy with incense from coronation rituals left unfinished. Chancellor Okato, robe immaculate but voice edged with sleepless strain, enumerated the Empire's immediate wounds: an emperor slain, heirs presumed perished, the Chimel Adabald vanished. He spoke of succession law, etched in Reman marble, of emergency prerogatives that permitted the council to hold the throne in stewardship, but his words floated above a deeper current of dread. For all their parchments and seals, the councilors grasped that the jewels' absence tore a greater hole than any power vacuum. Each member felt a chill whenever the conversation turned, inevitably, to the covenant. Without the amulet, the dragonfires would die, and with them the barrier that kept Tamriel separate from realms where logic warped and stone bled. They dispatched messengers at once. Silver-clad runners sprinted down the Green Emperor Way toward the Arcane University, bidding battle mages scry the roads for an unknown thief. Hawk-penned orders flew across the white-gold spire to Fort Dyrek, where the Legion's first cohort armed itself for citywide sweeps. Cloaked couriers left on courser bread, destriers bound for every provincial capital, carrying the same sealed script: hold your borders, reinforce your garrisons, and report any sign of Dedric's stir. Yet even as these letters galloped toward their destinations, oblique rumors overtook them, traveling by the swifter circuit of fear. Dawkins claimed the Nibbin's water tasted of ash, though the river ran clear. A midwife in the Talos Plaza wept that her newborn had opened eyes already ringed with crimson motes, pulsing like embers. In the Arboretum, a marble statue of Stendar sprouted hairline cracks that exuded frost despite the mild spring air. No edict could match the persuasive speed of such portents, and by the time Legion patrols posted proclamations on tavern doors, many citizens had already accepted that the world itself trembled within the catacombs of Cloud Ruler Temple. Grandmaster Joffer stood among silence older than any empire, his breath clouding in the high mountain chill. He had received word. Through riders loyal to the blades alone, a nameless prisoner was approaching with something beyond price. Joffrey's years in the service of Septime kings had honed caution to a razor's edge. He made no mention of the Emperor's death in open hall, speaking only through half-furled whispers to his most trusted captains. Meanwhile, he prepared a cell once used to safeguard Remen's lost crown, its iron lattice reinforced by wards. Laid down when the Akaviri first swore the oath of dragon blood, if the Chimley Adabal indeed rode toward the temple, every stone would rise to shelter it, so ran Joffrey's silent vow, though the scale of the threat still lay beyond reckoning. In Brumma below, tavern chatter faltered, nestled within pine-scented slopes. The city often woke early to distant legion horns, sounding the pale pass-watch rotations. On this morning, the horns blew late, their cadence unsure. Some folk blamed snowfall that had crept unseasonably down the range. Others cited rumors of reach raiders seen on the Orange Road. Yet innkeepers felt an older unease, as if their hearth fires met resistance unseen. Coins clinked more softly, lute strings lost tune. Behind shutters, devout households recited stendars. Mercy with greater fidelity than market gossip had ever merited. Erd of the Emperor's fall had not yet reached these heights, but something colder than night air threaded the city's veins. Far south, in the jungled swath of Valenwood, where the canopy blotted midday into perpetual gloam, the mythic dawn pressed closer to culmination. At a shrine half swallowed by Strangleroot, Raven Cameron conducted a rite whose cadence mirrored the twin moon's rotation. 5 dozen supplicants formed concentric rings around an obsidian plinth. They spoke in counterpoint, voices rising and falling like serrated waveforms. First a syllable praising Dagon, then a phrase denouncing Akatosh. The rhythm wound tighter until words blurred into raw phoneme, warping air thick with lantern fungi spores. At the rite's apex, Raven lifted a dagger forged from meteoric glass, smelted in the heart of Sundercliff, where veins of raw iron fell from void storms. The blade honed to impossibility, cut through nothing, yet drew blood from the very breath. Each acolyte inhaled, exhaled, and in that breath spilled infinitesimal threads of vitality that coalesced above the plinth into a shimmer shaped like a flame reversed. When the shimmer vanished, those present knew the time approached. One more door would soon be ready. Back in Cyrodiil, the Elder Council's proclamations entered outlying towns. At Skingrad, renowned for its vineyards and measured pace, Count Hasselder convened his court within marble halls, ambiguous in their light. Hasselder, a figure whose nocturnal habits many found unsettling, read the missive with slow care. Dismissed his retainers under polite pretext, then summoned his private steward. Soft words passed between them, words ancient and edged. Hasselder's steward soon departed through subterranean passages to consult records dating back to the Alessian reforms. For Hasselder understood something the council did not. The dragonfires were not merely a symbol but a keystone within cosmological calculus. Should they die, countless lesser wards, some guarding vampire covens, some holding bound spirits in battlefields long forgotten would slacken. To a county lord entwined with undeath, such shifts promise both peril and unforeseen leverage. At the College of Whispers outpost beside the Silver Road, adepts pored over star charts. Arctutor Selenius pinpointed perturbations in the serological resonance between Niren's core and its lunar satellites. He noted irregularities in Magicka's ambient density minute, yet distributed across a pattern that traced the towers of Tamriel-like joints in a spider's web. When a novice asked the meaning, Selenius answered that the wheel creaked upon its axle. In his journal written with the calm precision of a scholar who knows hysteria wastes ink, he predicted that if the Chimoadabal remained lost for longer than a fortnight, the gradient between Oblivion and Mundus would steepen, until even minor Daedra could manifest unaided. Threefold anchor, he wrote: blood, flame, prayer. Remove blood, flame flickers, prayer fails. Begin ward attunement for the day, begin ward attunement to purite frequence at least, volatile among princes. Even this conservative assessment revealed dread for Purite's realm. An endless skein of corrosive vapors, was seldom the first choice of sanctuary. Southeastward along the Niben, in the shadow-draped porticos of Bravel, another calculus unfolded. Regulus Terentius had never relished statecraft. He preferred the simpler coin flow of sugar, ale, and dice. Yet the emperor's death forced decisions. The county's coffers, already thin, could not afford prolonged readiness. And legion detachments had been reduced after border disputes siphoned troops to elsewhere. Regulus called upon the skooma-cat dens where his influence ran thick, compelling smugglers to pledge men in skiffs in case the Niben became an evacuation artery. His reasons were less civic virtue than cynical preservation. If chaos spread, controlling the river's flow of bodies and goods promised profit. Thus did the crisis begin knitting opportunism into its tapestry, each self-interested thread tightening the whole along Morrowind's western escarpments beyond the watchtowers. Dotting the Velothi spine, ordinators received a translated extract of the council's decree, while temple hierarchs debated whether Septime blood mattered to the tribunal, whose divinity had waned, yet whose pride endured Seers and Holomaean. Hermitage cast Diank upon Riverstone. Stains drifted, forming shapes disturbingly akin to Dedric's script. They saw 3 towers sinking, a 4th ablaze. One monk, ancient beyond counting, whispered that the ghost fence, sustained by the heart that once beat beneath Red Mountain, might feel a tremor, if that fence weakened even. A shade's breadth, what remained of Dagoth Yor's ash-mad phantoms could seep outward. The seers wrapped themselves tighter in eremitic silence. They understood the difference between possibility and omen had narrowed. Within the imperial city, dusk approached. Evenings customarily crowned the metropolis with lantern glow and chiming bells. This time the bells rang half a stroke too late, as if their familiar melody searched for footing. Torches cast uncertain shadows upon banners depicting the Dragon of Empire. In many districts, those banners had begun to fray at the edges, threadbare from long years, but now seeming to yield to a new, corrosive air. Legion patrols doubled around the Elven Gardens, though few civilians ventured out. Tailors drew shutters. Bakers quenched ovens early. Rumor told that the Black Horse Courier planned a special edition, but lacked a headline that conveyed both urgency and sanctioned calm. So no presses turned that night. Inside the White Gold Tower's library of scrolls, a single-blade operative, named Arctis Vale, consulted records under false archivist credentials. He searched treaties on Dedric incursion compiled since the First Era, examining parchment that crumbled beneath fingertip touch. A pattern emerged. Every major assault by Mehrunes Dagon coincided not only with slack in covenantal ritual, but with mortal complicity. Anchored at specific geomantic nodes places where telluric currents intersected with ancient Presir Dilic ruins. Vale marked these nodes on a vellum overlay. Kivach, Chadenhel, Leowin, Anvil, Brumma. He traced lines among them, lines that formed a clawed sigil reminiscent of Dagon's four-armed crest. When he folded the overlay, the central void aligned exactly with the Temple of the One. Realization chilled him. The cult's design was no mere series of raids. It was a ritualized throttling, each city a digit pressing upon Mundus, until the heart of the wheel gave way. Elsewhere, camouflaged by opulence, assassins moved. One such killer, cloaked in dust-cred robes beneath a veneer of merchant silk, slipped through the Aladrib tunnels under the Imperial Arena, seeking a rendezvous that would confirm the heir's death. Another lingered near Coral's East Gate, disguised as a traveling apothecary selling bittersweet leaf poultices. Each stalked potential bloodlines known only to the hidden analysts of the Mythic Dawn, yet the dynastic map they used was years out of date. Martin Septim, bastard son of Uriel VII, had journeyed to Cave Alsa months prior, drawn by a restlessness that he mistook for ordinary crisis of faith. The cult's dossiers placed him instead among obscure, monastic shelters in the Colovian West. By the time they learned otherwise, fate had already guided Martin to the city, whose skyline soon would stand against a sky the color of broken garnet. The days staggered onward, each dawn arriving with slightly more hesitation than the last. Astrologers across Tamriel charted Masser and Secunda as they parted from eclipse, noting that light on their crescent rims appeared tinged by subtle, shifting Hues violet, then rust, then a shade edging toward blood red at moonset. Scholars debated whether atmospheric dust or magical bleed-through caused such iridescence, and none could deny that star patterns jittered nightly by fractions of a degree too large for ordinary parallax. In Coral, an old Nord sentinel claimed, the constellation of the warrior once winked, as if grasped by unseen hand, its central star pulsing thrice before resuming its steady glow. Rumor said the sentinel resigned that very hour, swearing never again to count on heavens as firmament. Meanwhile, the prisoner who carried the Chimel Adabal pressed along forest paths toward Wayne and Priory. No chronicler recorded their thoughts. Yet imagination paints them walking beneath branches latticed against uncertain light, feeling the amulet's faint warmth through worn linen. Each step garnered weight, not physical, for the stone was light but mythic. As though every pace resounded in echoing chambers of covenant, wolves kept distant, birds hushed mid-song. Even the wind took care not to displace leaves from the traveler's path. For the amulet's crimson heart began to throb in quiet counterpoint to the walker's pulse. And the heart of Niren heard the resonance, tuning itself like a great shell listening to the sea within. Edwainen, Prior Mabrel, felt unease bloom behind his ribs long before hoofbeats signaled arrival. He knelt in the chapel's candle glow, muttering half-formed prayers that drifted between the eight and something older. Something that once reared serpentine across Pillarnall skies, when the traveler staggered into the courtyard mud-spattered. Eyes Romabril sensed the weight they carried before the chain emerged. He ushered them to Brother Penor's quarters, whispered Joffrey's name, and sealed the door. There the amulet flashed like dawn condensed, illuminating stone walls carved centuries ago by worshippers who chanted. Talus's name before the Alessian order banned such heresy. Mabril did not question provenance. He saw destiny coiled tight. As sigil not, he saddled his surest mare, thrust a letter into Penor's hand, and told the traveler that Cloud Ruler's gates would open at their knock, as the days shortened in spirit if not in season. The dragonfires continued their slow retreat. Altar priests measured flame height each hour, recording drop by degrees hardly visible, yet unarguably present. They attempted rituals to bolster the blazing sense of gold mercury. Corals in the Thume-derived scale, even relic sparks taken from the crown forges of Old Hroldan, but the fire answered only with sullen flicker. When word reached the council, deliberations turned to the Doctrinal Purity Act of 2E 489, which forbade replicating the dragonfire ignition without a reigning dragonborn. Legalists squabbled over interpretive margins. While they argued, the basin's glow dulled further. Beyond the mortal plane, the skein shimmered. In the Deadlands, Marin's Dagon paced upon a plateau of obsidian that cracked beneath each step, molten rivulets seeping out to form curdled lakes. His fourfold, voice-deep, flame-licked, echoing, uttered syllables older than Gnosis. Word rose like molten rock, hardened into basalt glyphs, then shattered under the weight of the next. Valkina's kin knelt in blasted rows, their armor wreathed in perpetual cinder. Dagon's attention, however, stretched through fissures unseen, toward Niren. He tasted the feeble pulse of the dragonfires and relished their fading. To him they were arteries in a prey beast gone anemic, soon to collapse with one decisive claw mark. He communicated not by speech, but through alignment of thought and realm, sending precise harmonics toward Mankar's paradise, there amid gardens that defied mortal logic, rivers flowing uphill through orchards. Whose fruit bled ruby nectar Camoran received the prince's cadence. He interpreted it to mean readiness. In a terrace of moon-pink granite, he convened his inner circle Ruma, his chosen daughter in spirit, Raven, sentinel of the Niben, and a masked figure known only as Drolnas, keeper of the sigil stone matrix. Cameron directed them to finalize gate sites, each aligned upon fault lines where allied wells once drew starfire into white towers. Above them, Paradise's artificial sky twisted to imitate dawn, though it was neither day nor night by mortal reckoning. Oh, roses. The color of drying blood opened in silent applause. While cult machinations quickened, the Elder Council issued a second directive, conscript battle mages to reinforce city temples across the heartlands. The Arcane University provided a cadre under Master Wizard Syrian, who arranged transport of charged Varla stones to bolster temple wards. Yet daisies wilted when those stones passed, candles guttered. Apprentices felt dizziness, as if their veins reversed polarity. Syrian recorded anomalies but pressed onward, reasoning that magical reinforcement, however imperfect, outweighed inertia. Still, he instructed each cadet to memorize evacuation sigils should the flux overwhelm local geometry. Prophetic. On the 21st night after the Emperor's death, a tremor shook the Imperial Isle, brief but sharp enough to rattle pewterware in dockside taverns. Witnesses on the palace ramparts saw a streak across the skyred, forked at its tail, vanish behind the Gold Coast horizon. Mages later suggested a bolide of dead-rit glass pierced the upper firmament, though no fragment was found. Enville. Fishermen claimed the lighthouse flames spiraled upward, forming a horned silhouette before snapping back into place. These signs, collated by blade analysts, painted a pattern unmistakable to those versed in Dedric tide tables, realities weave thinning at multiple anchor points, simultaneous, an orchestration rather than random seepage. Still the council clung to procedure. They debated a proposal to crown an interim emperor from among blooded counts, citing precedent in the interregnum. Yet every candidate carried barbs of factional risk. Eventually, Okato argued for indefinite stewardship until a true heir surfaced. To the public, they announced only that stability remained paramount, an assurance printed on vellum and nailed to guild halls. Such proclamations rang hollow by candlelight. Merchants began hoarding salt and dried meat. Caravans stood idle as teamsters demanded hazard pay. Even the chapel bells seemed to toll more cautiously, as though fearful of drawing Dedric notice. Amid these civic tremors, latent magic flared in unexpected corners. In Folkreth, a Nord child accidentally invoked a rune that had slept within. Her clans barrowed for 1,000 years, turning snow to glass. In Leowine's Marsh, wisps multiplied fivefold, ignoring luring rites meant to guide them away from settlements. Scholars speculated that magicka saturation rose as the dragonfires waned. Barriers once discriminating now grew porous, letting loose stray energies long pinned by Covenant's lattice. Alchemists bottled such anomalies where they could, calling them Dawntears, though few dared consume them. The prisoner, now escorted by Joffrey's swiftest riders, neared Cloud Ruler Temple. They crossed the Jarrell Pass, under a moon sliver so thin it resembled a scar on Night's face. At each watchfire, the blades saluted without question. They felt the amulet's resonance before eyes confirmed its ruby glow. Wind howled through. The great gates dragon-carved slats as they entered, the sound like distant war horns caught in ice. Joffrey greeted them in the courtyard, his breath forming a single cloud that hung unnaturally long before dispersing. He spoke few words. Taking the amulet in gloved hands, he bowed not to its bearer, but to the jewel itself, a relic of Pax older than his order. He led the prisoner to a small chamber lit by only one candle, and there they spoke of destinies interwoven, of the Emperor's final command of prophecy inscribed on elder parchments, and of a last living heir. In those same moments, deep under Lake Arius, cult artificers completed calibration of their first stable portal. They placed a lesser sigil stone into a rotiron yoke shaped as twin jaws. At the meridian of midnight, the stone burst into radiance, a column of rippling amber that snapped open reality's cloth like a sail caught by sudden gale. Air sucked. Inward, floor ash swirled upward. On the far side of that aperture stood a swath of deadlands, scorched horizon, slag towers, rivers of magma hissing beneath black winds. A sortie of scamps scrambled through first, shrieking laughter pitched, between delight and pain. Behind them lumbered clanfears, scales steaming in Munduz's cooler air. Cultists watched, their chants subduing fear, for they had expected the stench of sulfur and charred brass. What they did not expect was how the portal's edges shimmered, threatening to spread like oil on water whenever the scamps brushed against. Them Drownus noted this flux and marked runes to prevent overextension. The gate held. Acolytes exhaled in relief. They had proven the barrier could be pierced. They did not linger. A handful of Daedra, enough to test local reaction, crossed. Into Mundus, then retreated when whistles sounded. The portal collapsed on command, folding shut with a thunder hiss. Within minutes, the chamber returned to stillness, though the air retained a new dryness, as if moisture itself recoiled. Drolnas filed a report. Gate stable for 3 minutes, 32 heartbeats. Sigil integrity at 94%. Raven. Cameron carried this report to Mankar's glass-veined study in paradise. The master read it once, eyes reflecting script as if lit from within, and smiled, the subtle curve of one who sees inevitable dawn cresting far from mortal sight. The following. Dawn in Seratal felt wrong. Sunlight arrived, draped in faint rust, tinting river fog the color of old wounds. Farmers downriver from Pell's Gate found water wheels slowed, though currents ran swift. Birds flocked south prematurely. In Kvatch, the bells that heralded morning, mass rang hollow. Chapel elder Mellus Petilius attributed the timbre to humidity and ordered maintenance. Unaware that tiny fractures cracked the tower's bronze tongues. Beyond the city's high plateau, Martin Septime finished a restless vigil, reading scripture none could hear. But him saw fragments of Akatosh and Arche mingling in subtle disharmony. He closed the worn pages, feeling distant thunder though. The sky lay clear. A scent of brimstone drifted over the parapets. He glanced skyward and saw nothing. Yet in his chest, the blood of dragging stirred, uneasy, out in the west wheeled. A Legion reconnaissance unit under Captain Mattius patrolled Goldleaf Oak Groves. They had orders to report Daedric anomalies. Instead, they encountered silence so pervasive, it swallowed footstep crunch. Even cicadas had ceased. The soldiers recalled legends of silence before catastrophic eruptions, when pressure built beneath. Soil. They quickened pace, nerves taut. At dusk, they camped near a ruin of cracked marble pillars, once an allied moon shrine. Mattius set watches doubled, for bad campfires. In the hush, one private swore he heard distant chanting, syllables backward, yet when others listened, they heard only heartbeats. Morning found every sword edge mottled with faint soot, though no fire touched metal. They broke camp without breakfast. In Anvil, the lighthouse keeper dreamed of waves that stopped mid-crest, frozen glass smooth. In the dream, a horned shadow strode across the far horizon, and flame dripped from its fingers into the halted sea, turning water to smoke that coiled upward into a second sky. He woke gasping, the lighthouse beacon guttering against a wind. He could not feel on his skin. Later he mentioned the dream to a sailor, who laughed until realizing the keeper's eyes bore a faint ember ring around the iris, identical to those seen on corpses of past shipwrecks blamed on storm magic. The sailor purchased extra oil, refusing thereafter to sail on nights when the air smelled of distant Karnd. At Cloud Ruler, Joffre consulted the Chronicles of the Blades, an archive carved upon tablets laminated with dragon bone resin. He traced genealogies until his finger rested on the name Martin. Thereafter he summoned the prisoner, explained the peril, and dispatched both, flanked by 2 blades, back toward Kvatch. Their mission: reach Martin, secure him, and bring the amulet to safety. Snow still crowned the passes, but urgency brooked no delay. Horses thundered down the slopes, hooves sparking off frost-hardened stone. This departure faded to weave legend, remained unseen by the world. Yet its echoes would soon resound louder than any Legion trumpet. Inside the Imperial City, Syrian's battle mages installed Varla stones around the temple district. The stones pulsed cerulean, forming a lattice intended to buttress the dragonfires. But lattice work relies on anchorage, and the fire's core diminished hourly. Magicka from the stones bled into the air, manifesting auroral wisps that drifted. Between colonnades like pale curtains, citizens recoiled. Some declared them blessings of Magnus, others ill omens. One magistrate wrote an edict banning open observation of the aurora, citing risk of panic. The edict failed. People peered from windows regardless, and many swore they saw shapes horned, winged, colossal ripple across the lighted vales. Beyond the city, courier birds flew north carrying reports from Bruma. Hunters vanished near Bleeker's Way, their footprints ending in scorched rings. The south, Coral's guard captain wrote of a glow seen at midnight on the Gerald horizon. As though dawn rose within the mountain, the council dismissed some tales as hysteria until too many converged. Still, they hesitated. Politics demanded consensus before mobilizing the whole legion. Raising provincial levies could trigger memories of imperial overreach. Thus, precaution lagged behind necessity. Within the Old Mary's Headstones district, of the imperial burial vaults, necromancer infiltrators loyal to the King of Worms sensed lull in ward strength. They dared minor conjurations, pulling whispers from honored dead, queering secrets burned into bone. Each success fed their appetite. Though separate from the mythic dawn, they too benefited from slackening barrier. Tamriel's fracturing invited opportunists of every creed. Westward, near the Strid River, a band of Bosemary scouts, ostensibly envoys, negotiating timber quotas, secretly bore dawn-marked sigils. They charted ley lines underlying the Gold Coast Highway, testing soil resonance. With glass tuning forks, their leader, a wiry mare named Thalanor, scribbled notes indicating the easiest breach points along bedrock. One mark corresponded to Kubach's hillside. Oh, he smiled as he traced spiral rune around the name. Instructions encoded on his scroll designated that site for the cult's first full gate, large enough for a siege engine of Dedric brass. The scouts packed instruments, leaving only faint impressions in the earth, and vanished into forest gloom. Mankar Camoran stood upon a promontory in paradise. Gazing at a sky swirling with colors stolen from dawns not yet born, he saw in his mind the map of Tamriel, alight with points of rupture. He murmured lines from the Xarxes. When the dragon sleeps, the mountain dreams of flame. Beneath him, rivers reversed, flowing uphill toward a central spire where a great sigil stone awaited. He closed his eyes, and in that act forced a subtle pulse across the orbis, a signal to all cult cells that the 0 hour drew near. Somewhere, far below, Raven felt the vibration through charred sand and quickened her preparations. Evening settled over. With a hush more profound than silence, torches along parapets burned lower, though oil reservoirs were full. Citizens complained of sulfur in the breeze. Chapel acolytes prayed deeper, their voices trembling yet persistent. Martin Septime, unaware of his lineage, felt a pressure behind his sternum, as if someone whispered archaic syllables against the walls of his heart. He walked onto the chapel steps, looking westward over the Colovian highlands. The horizon glowed faintly, a smear of red too deep for sunset. Clouds seemed to coil like creatures bending in concealment. Martin crossed himself in a gesture half memory of seminary training, half instinct old as dragonfire. He heard distant thunder without lightning. Guards along the wall exchanged puzzled glances. Somewhere below the plateau, wolves howled, discordant. Chords as though answering unseen master. At precisely midnight, Cyrodiil's astronomers observed Master slip behind a veil of crimson haze. Stars nearest faded, leaving a void that crawled across the sky faster than simple cloud cover. Skywatch. On Somerset's east shore, Altmary stargazers recorded identical blotting, though no such haze should cross such distance in concert. At the moment of occlusion, every candle within the Temple of the One flickered out. Priests shouted, fumbling for flint. The dragonfires guttered, losing a breath of flame visible even to casual glance. A sudden chill swept the nave. Prefect. Astrid reached toward the basin, but heat no longer emanated. She stepped back, whispering dread. In that same breath, under Lake Arius, Drolna's activated a second stone. This one lodged not in iron yoke but in complex web of brass arms arrayed into tetrahedral geometry. The gate burst outward, larger than the first. Its edges sparked, leaving scorched runes on chamber walls. Scamps poured through faster, followed by armored Dremora, whose eyes gleamed violence. The cult greeted them with triumphant chant. Then, stilled as the prince's voice rumbled faintly across the aperture 4 syllables, unrecorded that seared sigils into every listener's mind. The Dedra saluted and marched toward a separate exit tunneling upward, toward a surface point pre-selected by ley lines. That exit lay many leagues from any city, a test for mobility and stealth. They would reach it by dawn. Back on the Gold Road, Captain Matthias's patrol spotted glow beyond Kvatch's ridge. They quickened pace. An hour later, they saw sky torn, though distance muddied shape. Some said it resembled a wound rimmed with living fire. Others recalled the mouth of a cave lined with molten glass. They thought perhaps hillside miners ignited pitch seam until a bolt of red lightning lanced downward from the tier, striking ground with a roar that rolled across valleys. Trees buckled outward as if wind burst from inside earth. Flames bloomed where the bolt touched. Matthias ordered formation, senses screaming that this was no natural pyre, yet discipline kept men steady. They marched as they crested final hill before Kvatch. The sight crystallized. A vast oval of swirling red hung above the city's southern flank, tethered to ground by pillars of blazing light. Figures moved within, silhouettes of spiked armor, quadruped beasts, wings carved of smoke. The gate's roar drowned human breath. Matthias stared, heart hammering. He whispered Oblivion. His men set spears, but terror leached marrow. They did not flee. Inside Kvatch, alarms sounded. Guards raced along battlements, calling citizens to shelter. Bells rang with fractured clang. Some cracked outright, as the chapel became refuge by default. Its stone thick, its windows narrow, its altar sanctified by 9 blessings. Martin Septime ushered townsfolk inside, voice firm despite inner tumult. He gathered children beneath pews, closed oak doors, and led litany older than the Empire.
Outside.
The gate roared louder. Somewhere beyond walls, scamps howled delight. This at last is the moment foreseen by the mythic dawn. Dragon fires faltering, first full gate aflame, panic blossoming across Heartland. Yet the crisis remained in infancy. Many more gates would bloom. The great gate had yet to open. The stone that anchored Dagon's permanent ingress still rested in paradise. Even so, the breach at Kvatch tore open the world's confidence. Imperial City, a scribe dropped quill, ink splattering prophecy scroll. In Bravel, Count Regulus Terentius spilled goblet, wine pooling like fresh blood. Crossed Tamriel. Sensitive souls woke screaming, hearts echoing the gate's roar, though leagues distant. The wheel had begun to turn along a new groove, carved by Dagon's talent, and somewhere between Cloud Ruler and Kvatch. Horses thundered under moonlight, carrying a nameless prisoner, 2 sworn blades, on a hope of fragile sparks soon to be tested by flame and void both. Behind them, the dragon fires dimmed another fraction, sending a sigh through Aetherius that mortals might interpret as wind, yet carried weight enough to bend prophecy. Ahead, Kvatch burned toward a dawn no soul desired, beneath a sky rewritten in the script of destruction. The second chapter of the crisis thus unfurled, inexorable in its descent, drawing every tower, chapel, and hearth into the widening gyre where Covenant cracked and the snarling breath of Oblivion spilled through. Smoke rolled across. Highlands like a black sea encountering sharp rocks, each gust twisting into new shapes before collapsing upon the slopes below Kvatch. From the road that wound up toward the plateau, the scent of scorched resin clung to every breath, sap and timber fused into a single bitter perfume. The horses bearing the nameless prisoner and the 2 blades slowed of their own accord, nostrils flaring as if instinct told them that the path ahead led not merely toward fire, but toward a place where the laws of mortal forests no longer held. Above the riders, the night sky, once crisped with late spring constellations, now swirled with sullen reds that deepened toward the gate's heart. The gate itself dominated the hillside, a vast oculus rimmed by molten stone, its interior surface. A roiling vista of maroons Dagon's deadlands. Beyond that membrane stood a horizon of blistered plains, rivers of lava, and rusted towers whose ramparts hissed sparks into a wind that carried no relief. Captain Mattias and his cohort were already on the move, attempting to usher fleeing townsfolk down the switchback road. Their discipline held, yet in every pale face flashed the reflection of something they had never trained to confront. A legionary could meet steel with steel? Emmanuel described a storm whose very color bled into earth and flesh alike. The prisoner dismounted first, drawing little more than a battered iron blade loaned by one of the blades. Yet the gem at their throat chimal, a dough ball glimmered brighter for a breath. As though recognizing the proximity of an open wound in creation, Joffrey's riders, trained to shade their surprise, nonetheless exchanged a glance that said, the object's power had grown since leaving Cloud Ruler. They could feel the beat of its subtle pulse, cadence counterpoised against the gate's ravenous roar. It's like a heartbeat set against a funeral drum. The trio pressed uphill, weaving through. Refugees, they reached the city's southern arch, just as a section of wall gave way under the impact of a clanfur. The beast, a hunched reptilian horror armored in jagged chitin, had burst from a side street and hurled, its mass against sandstone, until mortar cracked and stones fell outward. Guards atop the battlements answered with quarrels, yet each shaft merely glanced off scale, and the creature rammed again, widening the breach enough for smaller Daedra to skitter through. When the prisoner and blades arrived, flame already licked the rooftops along Kvatch's outer ring. Somewhere inside, chapel bells tolled a frantic rhythm at odds with liturgical order. The air so trembled with heat that sigils carved above. Door frames rippled like mirage. Within the chapel itself, Martin Septime knelt amid townsfolk. Prayer book clasped shut against his chest. His voice, steady despite the maelstrom, guided the people through verses of Arcae's benediction, not because he believed a prayer could smother flames, but because rhythms steadied hearts. The heavy oak doors rattled under the fists of those. Arriving late, in each new face that pushed inside, carried news of further collapse. The guardhouse lost. The marketplace blazing, the Count's castle silhouetted against an impossible crimson sky. Martin listened, nodding, repeating the same calm injunction moved to the transept. Keep low, breathe through Clothen, till a villager cried that the gate had expanded again. Then even his measured tones stilled. He sensed a pressure beyond mere heat, as though unseen claws pawed at the chapel's foundation. Outside, the prisoner reached the courtyard before the chapel. Captain Mattias, helmet cracked, directed a ragged line against onrushing scamps. The small Daedra screeched in high-pitched glee, spitting fireballs that shattered cobble into shards. Yet unlike Clanfears, these lesser fiends fell to steel, and the honed blades reaped a red harvest. In moments the immediate path was clear. Mattias turned upon seeing the amulet, confusion and faint recognition sparking simultaneously, yet he asked no questions, sensing larger designs. He shouted that the only hope lay in sealing the gate. No army could hold Kvatch so long as that. Wound remained. The prisoner, guided less by tactical doctrine than by the strange certainty of fate, offered single nod and stepped toward the grate. Burning rim crossing the threshold proved like wading through forging fire that held no warmth, yet scoured the skin's very essence. Sight fractured for a heartbeat, ground became sky. Sky became rivers of fire before snapping back into a landscape wholly alien. Dust soil crunched underfoot, leaving prints that glowed before fading. Spires of blackened iron jutted at impossible angles, some twisting toward a sunless dome of seething clouds. Far above, embers drifted on wind that smelled of iron filings and sulfur. Ahead loomed a citadel woven from brass plates and bone-red stone. Its towers ascended like broken ribs, each crowned with bladed parapets. From its topmost pinnacle, a beam of scarlet energy anchored the gate, drawn downward to a suspended crystal sigil stone that pulsed like a diseased heart. Around the crystal revolved rings of runes that flared and extinguished in hypnotic. Cycled inside this realm, time felt uneven, seconds stretching thin, then snapping quick as whipcrack. The prisoner navigated shattered causeways where molten rivers intersected. Dremora patrolled the bridges, their armor engraved with glyphs that seethed like hot coal. Each duel tested mortal reflex against Daedric cruelty. Yet each fallen guardian left behind weapons forged from void steel, blades singing with residual heat. Step by step, the prisoner ascended switchback ramps toward the citadel core, where inner chambers whirred like gears in some titanic engine. There, a lift glazed in living metal carried intruders upward, its walls alive with faces pressed beneath surface, silently screaming. At the apex, a final chamber housed the sigil stone within claw-like frames. The air crackled every hair, rose every nerve sang with warning. Grasping the crystal felt like plunging hand into molten glass. Yet the stone allowed itself to be taken, as though fulfilling design older than mortal rebellion. Instantly the beam broke. Rings of rune faltered, and an earthquake shuddered through the tower. Walls split, sky yawned, and the world of cinder dissolved into streaks of light. In the same blink, the prisoner found themselves back upon Kobachis. Smoldering plaza, sigil stone clutched tight. Behind them, the great gate imploded, folding like dying flower before blinking out, leaving only scorched circle and silence more deafening than any roar. That silence lasted mere heartbeats before. Cheers erupted from guards and survivors. Though much of the city lay charred, though Dedra still skulked among ruined alleys, the wound had sealed. Reinforcements could now contest flesh rather than concept. Captain Mattias bowed his head to the unknown hero, then turned to reorganize. Defense. The prisoner's task was not complete. They entered the chapel, moving through ranks of huddled townsfolk until eyes met Martin's steady gaze. Seared clothes, ash-strewn hair, none of that disguised the flicker of recognition within him. As though the amulet itself whispered across the short distance, the prisoner spoke few words. "Come, your place lies elsewhere. Hope rides with us." Martin did not yet know the reason, yet iron within him recognized command older than his priesthood. He gathered what few belongings mattered: an amulet of Arche, a folded letter from an unknown mother hand. Followed into the smoke, their escape from Kavach threaded through ravines where recent fires still smoldered. They skirted Legion skirmishes. With lingering Dedra, reached the Gold Road before dawn, and pushed east, horses lathered. From saddle, Martin asked questions that Joffrey's riders answered elliptically. Only when night fell again and campfire burned low did they reveal his bloodline. Words drifted beneath whisper of pines. "You are dragonborn, last of Septim line, Covenant's hinge." Martin listened without interruption. At length he said he believed in providence, not destiny, yet his eyes never left the amulet's glow, and he made no move to relinquish the path chosen. While Kavach smoldered, the shock of its assault propagated across Tamriel like tremor through spider's web. Travelers reaching Skingrad told of a burning sky and rivers of flame stories that vintners first dismissed as wine-addled until ash-tinged refugees poured through gates. Count Hasselder, convening his night court, dispatched riders north and south, instructing them to observe celestial alterations and report on ward fluctuations. He also penned a lost letter to the Elder Council urging immediate convocation of the Elder Scrolls interpreters. He alone suspected that the fabric of prophecy itself might be unraveling faster than precedent allowed in the Imperial City. The Black Horse Courier finally printed its special edition on crimson-dyed pages. Kavach destroyed. Oblivion Gate opened. No euphemism remained adequate. Citizens crowding market squares read the headline in silence, lips moving without sound. Some knelt on cobblestones, others fled to chapels. Merchants chained doors. Alchemists sold out of fire salts and frost salts in hours, though buyers hardly knew the recipes they needed. Lightning rods sprouted atop manses, as hedge mages offered warding services at extortionate rates. Yet even as fear spread, so did pockets of peril. Within hours of the courier's printing, 3 smaller gates yawned open in the forests flanking Bravel and north of Leowyn. Legion scouts witnessed both, sending runners who arrived breathless at the White Gold Tower to confirm worse suspicions. Kavach was only the harbinger. Chancellor Okado convened emergency council. Quills scratched parchment until dawn. They activated the wartime redistribution edict, granting local legions authority to requisition supplies without remanda, a decree not used since the Camoran usurper threatened Colovia. Meanwhile, Arcane. University's battle mages proposed a theoretical plan. Concentrate Varla stone, or is it known dragonline intersections to reinforce the liminal barrier near settlements. The mathematics, however, required more stones than existed even in allied vaults. Syrian estimated 25 towers Ekin, 2 white gold spire would be needed to duplicate the dragonfire's effect on a provincial scale, the council acknowledged. Impossibility, yet ordered partial measures, stones installed at the gates of every city, chapels to serve as dispersion nodes. What's delay, not remedy? Chetanhol felt the next blow. On the 12th day after Kavach, 2 gates materialized at dawn on hills opposite each other across the Corbula River, turning its mists a dull vermilion. Count Andalindres mustered his guard, but half were Dunmer. Veterans who remembered the Ghost Fence's horrors and recognized Dedrick threat at once, courage they possessed. Still, dread seeped through ranks when they saw armored Dremora stacking brass mantlets around the gate mouths. Engineering defensive, earthworks with methodical speed. The Count sent a courier through the Blackwood to Imperial City, pleading for siege engines, yet returning the road wounds slower than fear could travel, and before reinforcements could depart. One gate disgorged a siege crawler, a monstrous crab-like constructs whose legs crushed pine trunks and whose back bristled with flamethrowers. Its advance on Chetanhol's west wall began as the sun-crested Masalit towers. Gilding brass shell and false majesty reports from this assault stunned the Elder Council. The Drymora did not merely slaughter, they gathered prisoners, shackled them with burning fetters, and marched them back through the gates for purposes unknown. Witnesses claimed the prisoners' skin blistered yet did not char, held alive by Dedrick's sorcery until lost from sight beyond the Red Veil. Chaplains later speculated these souls fueled sigil matrices, each victim a tether to Mundus that stabilized the gate's anchor. Whatever the truth, terror magnified. The enemy took living captives, an atrocity worse than death. Across Seridal added new verses to intercessory prayers, imploring Arcade to shield the spirits of those still breathing. South along the Panther River, the mythic dawn intensified covert strikes. Silencer's assassins trained in both blade and illusions slipped into border outposts, murdering officers who held command of mountain passes. One such strike at Greaves Watch removed the only Legion captain familiar with the Jarrell approaches, leaving Gap the cult later used to smuggle sigil fragments. These shards, each no bigger than a thumbnail, radiated low-frequency resonance capable of weakening local wards. Buried beneath guard towers, they produced hairline cracks in chapel consecrations, rendering sanctuaries vulnerable to smaller, spontaneous gates. As these shards proliferated, random breaches began to open in meadows and caves far from population centers' flare holes to brief for major invasion, yet sufficient to disgorge hungering clan fur packs. Farmers returning from fields found livestock eviscerated, tracks burning in grass well after flesh cooled. Despite mounting crisis, pockets of resistance crystallized. In Anvil, a mercenary company called the Fighters Guild chartered independent patrols to escort refugees inland. They appropriated abandoned Legion signal towers to create a warning network, beacon fires tinted with alchemical powders to signify gate appearances green for distant, yellow for encroaching, red for siege. Their system allowed coastal villages precious minutes to flee before assaults reached them. Meanwhile, at the Mages Guild, Archmage Traven authorized distribution of emergency dispel scrolls. Although such scrolls could not close gates, they destabilized Lesser Daedra. Providing civilians means to shatter, scamp, or flame a Tronulch with single utterance. Stocks dwindled quickly. Scrollmakers worked sleepless, but Magica crystals grew. Scarce mind veins long tapped out. Across provincial lines, reactions varied. The Red Guards of Hammerfall, ever wary of foreign wars, fortified their alike citadels, but dispatched no cohorts east, citing the Elder Council's historic neglect of Yokadon crises. In Skyrim, High King Islad debated sending Nord shields south. Mood assemblies argued obligation, yet recalled how Empire levies once bled on foreign soil, while Skyrim's holds gained nothing. Still Jarls of Falkreth and Whiterun volunteered. Scouts across the Pale Pass, reasoning that if gates opened near Bruma, Nord borders would soon stand exposed. In Black Marsh, the Anzia Leal, who believed the Oblivion crisis, part of cosmic misbalance inflicted by man and Myr, alike began mustering guerrilla warbands within the inner swamps, prepared to defend Saxleal tribes should Gates vector into marshland. Thus the world fragmented into worry, each region weighing gratitude against self-preservation. While the mythic Dawn counted such hesitation among their greatest allies, back in Cloud Ruler, Joffre received Martin and the prisoner. Within the grand hall, lit by dragonfire braziers, he knelt not to priestly garb, but to bloodline and placed the amulet once more around Martin's neck. The gem's facets caught firelight, sending rays across stone walls covered with akaviri, carvings of dragons coiling around mountain summits. In that moment, a low hum filled the chamber, a resonance felt in bones rather than heard. The oldest blades nodded. They had felt similar vibration only during coronations, when dragon blood aligned with sacred metal. Martin himself remained still, absorbing weight of inheritance and more. He sensed the covenant as living presence. Fragile, yet unbroken, threads of gold unraveling slower now that rightful bearer held the jewel. Joffre explained what followed. Recover the relics required to relight the dragon fires. First, the divine artifact known as the Grand Well-Kinned Stone, rumored still sealed in the allied ruins of Miskarkand. Second, the armor of Tiber Septium, entombed in Sancri Tor's haunted catacombs. Each task thrummed with peril beyond measure. But time granted no luxury of doubt, while strategies formed atop Jarrell peaks. Mehrunes Dagon flexed greater portion of his will across the thinning veil. In the Deadlands, he summoned the Valkyna's War Council within an amphitheater carved into a crater of black glass. Each general stood upon basalt dais, shaped like broken blade points. Dagon issued decree without voice, a transmission of concepts. Accelerate gate deployments, target strategic towers wayrest, Brumma, Coral, then converge upon Imperial City. He designated a great gate for each assault, explaining in thought shapes how 3 anchors would triangulate a stable corridor wide enough for his own Titan form to manifest within Mundus. The generals saluted with weapons hammered to ring like anvils, sparks cascading. Thus began the second wave. Systematic, calculated, accompanied by war machines beyond the first scout's nightmares. Accordingly, the north wall of Brumma, a gate erupted beneath the eaves of Cloud Ruler's forest. Snow hissed a vapor where it touched the threshold. The Brumma Guard, led by Captain Bird, watched with grim resolve. They had prepared fire arrow caches, palisades soaked in oil, siege blocks ready to roll down slopes. Yet they lacked numbers. Appeals to the Elder Council for reinforcements remained pending, overshadowed by the capital's own anxieties. Bird therefore turned to the Blades for counsel. The old fortress courtyard witnessed brisk councils where Legion tactics blended with dragon cult vigilance. They concluded that closing this gate would require volunteers capable of navigating treacherous, mountainous terrain, slipping into the Deadlands realm where spikes of obsidian might shear snow boots to ribbons. Rimmon, a young Nord blade, offered first, but Martin forbade his departure. Cloud Ruler needed defenders, if worse should come. The prisoner stepped forward again, quietly. His earlier feat at Kavoch lent authority no rank insignia could match. He would go. Before dawn, he descended icy paths, followed by a handful of Brumma militia bundling axes in oiled hide. Through spruce glens into the gate's crimson aura, crossing threshold as first light touched the Jarrell ridges. That sun shone paler now, filtered through haze thickening each day. Behind them, Brumma's defenders arrayed along walls, praying their breath would not crystallize before they saw the portal collapse. The Brumma gate realm differed from Kavoch's, instead of broad plains. Jagged cliffs spiraled into chasms filled with seething rivers of coals. Chains thicker than castle towers stretched across void, anchoring floating citadels.
A lightning crawled along links,
Illuminating grotesque giants cast in iron. The air carried perpetual scream of metal bending just short of fracture, yet the principle remained. At the heart loomed a sigil stone upheld by lethal architecture. Hours passed in harrowing ascent, crossing chain bridges between maelstroms of sparks, Slaying Dedra amid echoes that distorted depth perception, militia grit teeth pressed on. At last they reached a tower's apex, where the crystal writhed within claws shaped like eagle talons. The prisoners seized stone. Tower quaked, realm folded. Again they stood upon Mundu's ground with snow swirling, Brahma's walls intact. The garrison's cheer rose into cold sky, echoing among crags, carrying hope further perhaps than soldiers knew. Hope, however, did not halt the proliferation. By the crisis's second month, gates dotted every highway. Cartographers at the Imperial Geographic Society updated parchment maps nightly, marking new flare points with soot-black ink. Their charts soon resembled pock-scarred skin. Supply lines faltered. Caravans diverted around Dedrick zones, adding weeks to grain deliveries. Cities rationed bread. In Leoween Marsh, lizard folk guides demanded triple pay to ferry barges past. Swamp gates, where Argonian souls risked conscription into unspeakable Dedrick forges. In Coral, lumberyards struggled to replace scorched timbers. Acorns would sprout, yes, but decades stood between seedling and beam. Countess Ariana Valga reserved her private stores for town reconstruction, inciting rumors of favoritism that simmered toward revolt. Within these social fissures, the mythic dawn seeded further chaos. Disguised as relief workers, they distributed stolen Combray wine, laced with mild hysteria toxin, inciting riots that drew guards away from chapel wards. One incident in Bravel ended with angry mobs burning warehouse districts they believed hoarded supplies. In the confusion, cult operatives sabotaged the garrison's signal tower, delaying warnings of the gate opening for leagues north, even after authorities restored order. The garrison lacked munitions to challenge the gate fully. Instead, they established pickets and prayed for reinforcement. So did despair and anger become weapons as potent as Scamps and Dremora. Under such strain, the Elder Council finally ceded command authority to Chancellor Okado without full quorum, naming him potentate until crisis ended. Implemented martial law across Talos Plaza and Waterfront, stationed Legate Felk in charge of curfew enforcement, and ordered all guilds to contribute manpower or lose charters. Mages Guild chapters responded swiftly, Fighters Guild begrudgingly. Thief's Guild vanished deeper into sewers, smuggling refugees for coin beyond official tallies. Amid bureaucratic turbulence, Okado clung to one lifeline, reports from the Blades. That an heir yet lived, the amulet secured, steps underway to relight dragonfires. He shared this secret with only the most trusted generals. To others he issued cautious optimism, a threadbare veneer threatened daily by Newgate sightings. Meanwhile, Arton studied within Cloud Ruler's scriptorium, poring over ancient treatises. Describing the Chim, he deciphered contested passages of the scrolls of praxographical inquiry, cross-referencing with Alessian codices to deduce precise ritual for reigniting fires. He concluded they required the sacred blood, the sacred flame, the sacred stone, yet also something more. A relic imbued with divine presence powerful enough to call Akatosh's attention across weakening barriers. That relic, he hypothesized, could be the ancient artifact known as the Great Welkind Stone. Only 3 such stones remained unshattered. One rumored still within Miss Karkin's inner sanctum, guarded by undead allied sorcerer kings. Martin admitted the risk. Still, he accepted necessity. The prisoner soon recovered from Brahma engagement, volunteered. Joffer assigned a squad of blades and a contingent of Coral Rangers versed in subterranean tactics. Their expedition planned to skirt active gate zones, traveling by night, avoiding Legion checkpoints to prevent rumor. They departed Cloud Ruler, under moonlight barely visible through haze. The Gerald air crackled with distant thunder, though skies remained cloudless noise, later identified as collisions between overlapping liminal layers. Scholars would name them dawnquakes, yet even such portents failed to daunt the group as they slipped into dark valleys southward toward Miss Karkin's ivy-choked ruins, each step carrying the Covenant deeper into halls where allied ghosts still whispered of Starlight Kingdoms lost. While they journeyed, Ravan Camoran enacted the next phase, Paradise's gate to Mundus. Deep in the lay-focused chamber, she placed the great sigil stone upon a dais carved from meteoritic glass. When it settled, a tremor shook the realm, and the garden sky writhed, adopting colors unseen by mortal retinous shades that inverted. Thought hues that tasted like iron in morning. Cameron watched, serene. The prince sent his approval in the form of a heedless flame crawling across the dais. Monkar's voice echoed from beyond, instructing Raven to prepare for the opening. Of a great gate at Brumma, once two preliminary gates softened the weave. She bowed, left banners aflutter in starlit wind, and set about rallying her field commanders. The calculus neared culmination. 3 great gates, 3 keystones, 1 dawn eternal, back in Brumma. Captain Byrd received missive that scouts sighted. Dremora battalions massing inside the newly reopened North Gate. He calculated that within days they would attempt full assault. Supplies ran thin. He convened Countess Caroline and Cloud Ruler envoys, pleading for external armies. None could arrive in time, in that council chamber heavy with mountain cold. A plan emerged, born of desperation and valor. Hold outer slopes long enough for whomever guided Martin's mission to return. Then, should a great gate open, volunteers would follow the earlier example, penetrate, seize the cornerstone, seal the breach. It demanded a courage beyond measure, yet Brumma's people, witnessing Kuvach's ashes, found stoic resolve. They sharpened axes, repaired shield rims, forged new arrowheads from melted farm tools. What they lacked in numbers they fortified, with conviction that if Brumma fell, the slope to Cloud Ruler would lie bare. And in that fortress the hope of Tamriel now resided. The 3rd month dawned beneath sky that no longer mirrored Niren's earlier blues. The upper atmosphere bore a permanent, rust sheen, as though sunlight crossed invisible smoke. Scholars at the Imperial Observatory recorded a 4-degree dip in average star magnitude. Constellations dimmed. Not from clouds, but from interference where void pressed closer. Birds altered migration southward. Insects hatched prematurely. Nothing stood wholly outside Crisis's reach. In Coral's oak-shaded plaza, the great oak began to drop leaves weeks before its time. Each leaf edged with tiny crystalline growths that crumbled to bitter dust. Druids lamented an omen that the green-packed cycles unraveled. Across the continent, a Dunmer Ashlander wise woman interpreted similar signs in Vardenfell's fungal towers. Their spores drifted east on winds not felt. Carrying faint glow, inside, miscarkened, the expedition faced trials older than Empire. Marble corridors curved upon themselves, forming impossible loops. Luminous well-kinned sconces flickered in patterns that induced vertigo. Revenant likes, crowned with emerald flames, guarded the inner sanctum where the great stone floated between. Fractured columns. When the prisoner lifted the stone, its glowed deep as winter constellations. A shockwave dusted bone guardians to powder. Yet far above, across spaces unseen, Runas Dagon felt the disturbance and roared in contempt. A tremor shook Cloud Ruler even as the expedition began return. Snow cascaded from roofs, dragons' heads carved upon merlins, shook free icicles. Martin, meditating in chapel alcove, gasped as well-kinned light surged through amulet. He whispered thanks, yet new final trials loomed. Armor of Talos, housed in Sanctuary Tor, where Underking's curse still prowled, the untested ritual itself. As Martin prepared, gates multiplied anew. Anvil gained second breach near its lighthouse. Leowyn saw twin openings across Marsh Walkway. Chaddenhall's 3rd gate blinked into existence with an arrow shot of its earlier 2, forming triad whose energies pulsed in resonance. Blade's analysts concluded these triads were preliminary stages. The pattern pointed unambiguously to Brumma next. It dispatched couriers bearing maps and strategy suggestions to Byrd. Each courier risked ambush. Some never arrived. Those who did found the garrison drilling tirelessly, archers calibrating arcs for siege crawler anatomy, pikemen reinforcing moats with sharpened stakes to impede storm atronachs. Even children contributed carving arrow fletching, carrying water, stinging hymns to stiffen uncertain hearts. Far beneath Lake Arius, Dralna's recorded final preparations for the Great Gates. Sigil calibrations complete, resonance stable. Dagon's generals eager, only final catalyst remained, acquisition of the amulet. Yet the cult's infiltration attempts at Cloud Ruler failed Blade's vigilance unflagging. Silencers posted along mountain passes ambushed supply lines, yet never glimpsed their quarry. Each failure prompted harsher measures. One evening, a robed agent infiltrated Brahma's smithy, attempting to poison arrowheads with Maimer's Bane, only to fall under ranger blades. Interrogation yielded nothing. The cult conditioned its assassins to self-immolate when compromised, tongues blackening to ash within seconds. The Shadow War escalated even as Daedric forces ravaged open battlefields. On a dusk veiled by red aurora, word reached Cloud Ruler. Great Gate imminent. Martin ordered immediate departure for Sancre Tor. The prisoner would accompany, along with the chosen squad. Joffre argued risk. Yet Martin insisted destiny paced beside him, not behind. They left under starless sky, weaving through forest paths suffused in smolder-colored light. Behind them, Brahma braced for dawn that would likely open with horn blasts and sky wounds. In Martin's satchel lay the great stone, its pulse synchronizing slowly with amulet. Each beat signaled that one more fragment of Covenant returned to rightful harbor. But until every fragment aligned, the dragonfires remained coals nearly spent. Thus the crisis deepened, layering dread upon ash, hope upon courage, as Tamriel balanced upon edge of a blade forged by gods and sharpened by cultists. Cities smoldered, gates yawned, and across every province tales grew of nightmarish vistas. Glimpsed through keyhole rifts, black marshers spoke of bogs turned to boiling tar. Alti and Somerset witnessed stars sinking below horizon like stones into deep water. Yet amid such terror moved small bands of mortals blade, ranger, priest, farmer who defied cosmic adversary not with certainty, but with will. They ferried relics, closed gates, soothed children's cries. And far above mortal din, in a realm where gardens sang hymns to entropy, Moncur Camoran watched the clockwork of his revolution nearing its chime, confident that when the final gate burst wide, the dawn he shepherded would remake all things. The chapter draws to its momentary pause here. Though the tide it describes flows onward without rest, toward frozen battlements of Brahma, where dragon blood shall meet siege, toward haunted crypts of Sancre Tor where history's bones rattle, toward the heart of the imperial city where a flame gutters and a realm waits either rebirth or undoing. Mist wreathed the lower slopes of the Gerald spine as the party descended from Cloud Ruler Temple. Each rider hunched beneath a hood darkened by weeks of ash-laden snowfall. Martin Septim led without ornament, the Chimel Adabal pulsing beneath his cloak like a secret dawn. He spoke rarely, confining his breath to soft commands for pace or halts. The blades matched that reserve, letting the dull ring of tack and the hiss of hooves on frost-drimed shale fill the spaces where lesser companies might have passed the hours in nervous talk. The road threaded between spruce boles, blackened by gate-blown sparks. More than once a trunk still smoldered within, coal red at its core, though a skin of bark lay unburned above. Such half-living trees marked every valley now, reminders that the enemy's hand reached deeper each night, beyond that charred corridor. The world narrowed into switchbacks so steep that riders dismounted, leading their mounts by braided reins toward the cloud bank. There, at a seam where ice bit bare stone, Martin paused to look north. The sky above Brahma glimmered the color of quenched iron, and within that tarnished vault, occasional strobes of crimson leaked through, flashes too swift to be lightning, yet too deliberate to be mere aurora. He measured their rhythm, thinking of a heart that beat for another realm. And New Brahma's defenders would soon be tested harder than any Legion manual dared imagine. Yet his present duty lay still farther. East, past the shoulder of Mount Agranor and beneath the shadow of the capstone citadel once called the Crown of the North, Sancre Tor waited like a silent judge. They made the ruins with the second sunset. A looting wind slid through sundered arches. carrying scents of old dust and something colder than snow, a hush that predated mortal memory. The approach road, once paved with white granite flags, lay shattered beneath creeper vines whose leaves remained green despite the altitude, as though feeding on echoes rather than sunlight. At the threshold, the blades halted, forming a half-ring, while the prisoner eased the gate aside. No hinge groaned. The doors had long ago slipped from their mountings, leaning together like two exhausted combatants who kept each other upright. Beyond them waited a vestibule floored in mosaics of black-haired dragons and starburst crowns. Dried leaves clustered in corners, but no scent of rot rose. Instead, a faint metallic temps lingered, kin to the air near a thunderstroke. Uff had briefed them. Within these chambers lingered a curse laid by the Underking Yunderkingya, remnant of the bloody pact by which Tiber Septim secured dominion. Over the Dureni and the Reachmen, blades once swore never to tread here, for their brothers who entered seeking relics were said to have become restless guardians. Yet the armor of the empires, sanctified by Tiber's own spirit, remained locked. Beyond those haunted halls, and without it, the Covenant might lack the final spark to draw Akatosh's gaze. Martin stepped forward first, his lamp casting a pool of honey light. Where the beam touched walls, bar-leafs awakened, lines of starlight crystals shimmered, tracing battles and coronations in a silent pageant that marched beside them through the outer vaults. They descended spiral stairs chipped by centuries of frost heave. With every turn, the taste of the air changed, first dusty, then sharp with ozone, and finally tinged by a sweetness like bruised moon sugar. At the stair's end, the corridor arrived at a bronze door emblazoned with a doubled dragon sigil. Martin pressed a gloved palm to its cold surface. For an instant, nothing stirred. Then the sigil exhaled a faint saffron glow that ran beneath, the bronze-like wake light beneath water. Bolts slid of their own accord. The door yawned. Inside lay a cathedral-sized crypt. For sarcophagi occupied its cardinal points, their lids crowned by statues of mailed warriors kneeling beneath unfurled banners. Between those monuments hung a hollowness so deep that the lantern's light seemed swallowed before it crossed. Midair, Martin and the prisoner advanced one pace, and as they did, the statue's eyes shimmered. A sound arose not from stone, but from air, vibrating with a note pitched lower than hearing, felt instead in bone. The guardians stood, stone flowing like thawed wax until armor and flesh distinguished themselves. 4 blades of eras passed, long dead yet bound by duty unlapsed. Their helms were open, revealing faces neither decayed, duck, nor alive, but imbued. With argent fire that blew within their skulls like candlelight inside glass, weapons hissed from scabbards. The present blades formed a shield apex about Martin, yet he raised a hand. His voice steady, almost gentle, spoke the litany of reproach, that the order kept for absolving oath-broken brethren. Each word rolled across the vault, lifted by unseen choir, and settled like ash upon the dead men's shoulders. Ghost flame dulled. The first guardian lowered his blade, mouth moving in soundless confession. The second knelt. The third crossed, arms over breast. The fourth simply faded, dissolving into motes that drifted upward until lost in the gloom. Silence returned. And with it the realization that the passage to the inner sanctum now lay unguarded. They walked through arch after arch that dwindled from grand, too humble until the ceiling pressed only a man's height above. There in a niche, barely larger than a wayside shrine, rested the armor of Tiber Septim. Age had not dimmed its polish. The cuirass was wrought of brushed ebony, overlaid with beaten gold that traced the twin heads of Akatosh in mirrored relief. Greaves and gauntlets, nested beside, each joint still oiled, as though some unseen steward tended them. Martin regarded the cuirass as a man might regard the memory of a father he never met. When at last he reached out, his fingertips trembled not with fear but with reverence. The moment flesh and metal met, the chamber's torch stones flared. Blue, and a presence filled the confined air massive stern, yet undeniably warm. Those who later tried to name it could only call it the echo of Talos, stripped of thunder, yet imbued with the calm gravity of a mountain. Martin closed his eyes. When he opened them, the flicker subsided, but the amulet at his throat pulsed with new synchrony, as though the blood gem had recognized its ancestral shell. He spoke one word: ready. No other ceremony attended the transfer. They wrapped the armor in oiled canvas, bound it with dragon silk cord, and retraced their route with haste, muted only by solemnity. Behind them, the tomb closed, the bronze door sealed without touch, leaving the hall as they had found it, save that the curses chill had eased to mere winter cool. The 4 lost blades would trouble Sanctuary Tor no more. The journey back proved perilous in subtler ways. The night after leaving the ruin, they camped beside a frozen tarn where no fish swam. While sentries walked circuits, jagged lights pulsed beneath the lake's glassy skin, reflecting a crimson aurora that crawled restlessly overhead. One guard swore the reflections formed a horned silhouette each time the wind sighed. Another muttered that the moon's secunda had begun to shed flakes of its surface. Where the flakes fell, faint sparks rose, making the night look like a forge. Dawn revealed no fallen lunar shards, yet every rider felt the veil thinning under their boots. As they descended into Brahma Valley, smoke pillars marred the horizon. A pair of smaller gates had opened during their absence, one in a copse northeast of the city, another among goat pastures to the west. Both had been closed by hastily formed militias, but not before Dremora destroyed grain stores and carried off 20 villagers. The defenders' faces revealed exhaustion more spiritual than bodily. They fought not single battles, but an unending calculus of siege work, morale, and funeral rites. Yet when Martin reached the gate, rising from his saddle in plain priest's habit, shoulders burdened with a canvas-bound relic, the sentries who recognized his bearing bowed. Rumor of his lineage had spread, not through proclamation, but through the whisper networks that carry hope. Some addressed him as sire, others simply as touchstone, the word they used when they dared not utter Septim aloud, for fear the enemy listened. Inside, Cloud Ruler Temple, the scene had changed. Where once corridors echoed largely empty, now warm. Bodies crowded every niche, emissaries from Coral, squad leaders from the Mages Guild, even a knot of Dunmer refugees who had volunteered as scouts in gratitude for sanctuary. Tables along the Great Hall bore maps bristling with colored pegs, black for active gates, white for closed, red for anticipated Great Gate triangulations. Joffre moved among these clusters with the silent assuredness of a man who had traded sleep for vigilance. When Martin entered, the Grandmaster's usually guarded eyes softened. The armor was borne to a side chamber where initiate smiths would polish and refit buckles under Joffrey's watch, careful to treat the cuirass less as tool than as relic, whose very aura might shear careless fingers. Only then did the council convene. Representing Brumma stood Captain Bird and Countess Caroline. Coral had sent Guard Commander Modden. From the Mages Guild came Master Wizard Syrian and a journeyman named Roliand, who specialized in liminal calculus. Martin addressed them in the simple cadence of a homily. Brahma would be the crucible. 2 gates already gnawed at its borders. When the third breached, the Great Gate would follow. To defeat that pivot, they must unite archers, mage, cohorts, and footmen from every hold willing to stand. He asked for no fealty, only presence. Syrian pledged a cadre of shield conjurers. Modden promised quarrel hundredweight. Bird vowed every able Brumma citizen. Even the Dunmar scouts offered to sabotage Dedrick forges in the hills. Resolution sealed, Martin turned to colder logistics rations. Prayer rotations. Frost salve dispensaries, until each attendee felt the weight lift from personal fear onto shared purpose. In the nights that followed, Martin sequestered himself. Within an upper chamber once used as monkish cell, now repurposed as study. There he unfurled the gold-inked pages of the Mysterium Xarxes, recovered weeks earlier from Mythic Dawn caches. The book-breathed faintly letters reordered themselves. Along a spiral logic implied by Maroon's Dagon's unknowable grammar, to read without preparation risked mind shatter. But Martin approached not as novitiate, but as blood-bearing fulcrum of the Dragon Covenant. He traced symbols with a quill dipped in well-kinned essence, reciting counterverses from Alessian psalters. Slowly, the riddles yielded. He learned that Cameron's paradise functioned as both stronghold and crucible, a realm that could float adjacent to Mundu's only so long as the dragon fires dimmed. Fed by the great sigil stones and shielded from Aketosis. Cyclical gaze. Its portal could be forced only by invoking the same calculus of opposition blood of mortals. Blood of creation and a keystone formed from a great gate. Martin's focus sharpened. Brahma's impending gate would supply that keystone. If someone could claim the stone before Dagon's vanguard completed the merge, while he deciphered. The prisoner and a detachment of blades shuttled between Brahma and nearby passes. Drilling militia in anti-Dedric phalanx and fire discipline, archers practiced transmitting oil-soaked rope shafts along fixed arcs to gate peripheries, knowing flame-disrupted sigil conduction. Mages rehearsed synchronized shock pulses designed to stall siege crawlers' limb servo enchantments. Exercise cost energy scarce in freezing altitude, yet the mountain folk adapted, binding straw mats to armor to blunt clan fur charges. Weaving pine resin into shield edges to resist heat fractures, the day before the great gate, a hush settled. On Brahma, snow clouds gathered but did not break, hanging low and gravid as though awaiting permission. Martin donned Tiber's cuirass above humble robes, the Chimmel Atabal resting against the embossed twin dragons. The unexpected harmony between ruby facets and gold relief cast a glow that reached beyond torchlight. Tinting stone pillars rose. He moved among troops encamped in City Square, offering words neither lofty nor bleak. Serve each other. Remember home. Stand until the realm itself tells you it is safe to sleep. Many did not grasp the cosmic stakes, yet in his calm they found surrogate certainty. At dusk, he ascended the curtain wall. From that height, the valley stretched pale and silent. Only a faint pulsing ember beyond the tree line betrayed the staging. Of Dedric forces, they came at dawn. First a tremor, rolling through snowpack like distant thunder. Then the crack as two minor gates materialized left and right of the main road, their rims rotating like opposing millstones. Dremora surged, but Brahma's archers met that rush with disciplined valas, hissing through still air, many igniting midway as magefire kissed fletching. Clanfears galloped into pit traps, studded with obsidian shards. Flame Atronox shattered under frost lances. Twice breach teams pressed wooden mantlets to the ramparts, only to find resin-slicked murder holes, vomiting flame downward. Through each wave, Martin watched impassively, measuring not casualties but cadence, waiting for the moment when the beating heart behind lesser gates would thrust forward its apex at mid-morn. The sky over the central valley tore. Light warped. Inward, a vortex of ember condensed until with a roar that muted every scream, the great gate unfolded like a colossal flower of brass petals. Its maw dwarfed the others, towering until its corona brushed the snow clouds. Within that breach marched a war engine taller than chapel spires, a siege walker whose limbs ended in molten claws, whose dorsal carapace housed a furnace glaring white. Its target lay beyond Brahmacloud Ruler Temple, linchpin of the dragon blood butt. The gate's corridor needed minutes to widen enough for the walker's full egress. Those minutes were the window Martin had awaited. He turned to the prisoner. No speech passed. Only a nod, the same nod shared at Kvatch, at Brahma's northern gate, and in the halls of Miskarkond. The prisoner adjusted battered cuirass, gripped, a Daedric longsword scavenged an earlier skirmish, and sprinted. Two blades followed, though all knew only one need reach the stone. They crossed the no man's land as Dedra reeled from fresh war detonations, slipped into the whirlpool of flame, and were swallowed. The realm beyond differed again, a canyon ring of basalt plates stacked like giant scales around a pit wherein the great sigil stone hung, suspended over a steam haze shot through with claws of lightning. Every few breaths a pulse surged along chains, tethering the stone to 4 pylons adorned with runes that mirrored those glimmering on the Mysterium Xarxes. The cavern roof groaned with each pulse. Sparks rained, sizzling upon fractured obsidian. Walkways, The prisoner advanced, flanked by the blades, cutting through scattered scamps and 2 Dromora captains whose ebony axes bled embers when they struck stone. One blade fell, armor cleaved, the other pressed on, shielding until the prisoner vaulted a shattered parapet and landed upon the central dais. Heat hammered skin, yet flesh did not char. As hand closed upon the sigil stone, a vibration coursed upward, the sensation of grasping molten star metal that wanted to become thought rather than matter. The prisoner's vision narrowed, edges flooding white, heart echoing the stones. Rhythm until the 2 beats fixed into single cadence. Then the pylon shrieked. Chains snapped upward, recoiling like severed nerve. The realm shuddered. Cliffs crumbled inward. Sky ruptured into shards of colorless glass. Reality expelled them. The Brahma field, soldiers saw a flare brighter than noon blossom inside the gate throat. An instant later, the marvel imploded. The great gate crumpled inward, brass petals curling dry, swept into nothing as though inhaled by an inverse gale. Shockwave snow blasted outward. Many fell, yet the roaring ceased. The siege walker half emerged, froze and shattered, its molten. Joints cooling instantly to brittle black, limbs toppling in segments that gouged the hillside before slamming to rest. Silence followed a silence so pure, even the wheeze of wounded seemed sacrilegious. From that hush, 3 figures stumbled into view. One blade bore scorch marks across shattered shield. The prisoner walked unaided, sigil stone hugged against breast like an infant star. All eyes turned to Martin upon the wall. He raised one arm, a simple salute of acknowledgement, then turned. Inward, the stone would be joined with the well-kinned crystal and the divine armor. The ritual he had pieced together from Xarx's fragments could proceed, yet his brow furrowed, for another truth weighed upon him. Dagon would sense the keystones. Theft, and hasten his design. Night fell on a Brahma, strewn with alien wreckage. Fires burned where forge-hot shards embedded in timber. Medics dressed burns with melted ice. Priests of Arcais spoke last rites over fallen, their prayers soft in cold air. Martin spent those hours in Cloud Ruler's sanctum. Upon a dais of old cedar, he laid the great well-kinned stone. The recovered sigil stone. A vial containing ground essence from a defeated Dedroth blood of the Dedra. And a second vial of Tiber Septime's own dried ichor stored within the cuirasses. Padded liner blood of the divine. He recited equations woven from both dragon tongue and unknown alphabets seen only in dream. Runes lifted off candlelight, dancing like motes caught in reversed gravity. The artifacts resonated, each note a chord in larger harmony. He felt the portal blueprint arranging itself, a circle whose radius extended beyond architecture into narrative, a gate not of stone, but of story. Outside the chamber, Joffre posted double guards. Not Dedra this time, but the mythic Dawn, who, sensing their timeline narrowing, infiltrated mountain passes in squads. 2 skirmishes erupted after. Midnight. Cultists bearing sigil brands cut through palisade posts, but met ranger pikes. Their bodies burned with unnatural cold flame, leaving only blackened silhouettes. Ravens carried reports down every valley that dawn. Tamriel's folk woke to word that Brahma held, a great gate fell, and the Emperor's heir stood revealed like ember beneath ash. Hope walked thin legs. Yet each city felt fractionally taller in quarrel. Countess Valga poured her private store of cavalry grain into guild coffers and ordered stable bosses to ready mounts for eastern deployment. In Shadin Hill, Count Indres released prisoners sentenced for petty theft, offering their freedom in exchange for frontier duties. Even in Anvil, where coastal raids still flared, Countess Malona resolved to dispatch ships conveying Westweald, volunteers up the Niben. Such decisions, scattered yet convergent, marked a tilt in the tide, a species of collective breath drawn before stepping once more into fog. But the enemy adjusted as well. Ravan Comoran convened remaining cell leaders. In Paradise, voice crisp with undampened zeal. She commanded them to accelerate attacks against supply depots, to poison wells, to spread forged leaflets accusing Joffre of Dedric pacts. Confusion, she claimed, would serve where gates failed. Behind her, Manker watched without speaking. his gaze measuring the threshold between confidence and certainty. The Great Gate's loss annoyed him, yet it fulfilled another clause hidden deep within Xarx's script. Each time mortal blood thwarted Daedric tide, the tension drew mortal and mythic realms closer. The next portal, he promised himself, would open within the very heart of the Empire. For that he needed only the amulet, or failing that, Martin's blood. He turned toward a balcony overlooking rivers that flowed backward and smiled a soft, unreadable smile in the high dawn after the Great Gate's ruin. Martin emerged from the sanctum. His eyes looked older, as though he had witnessed lifetimes within those few hours. To the prisoner he entrusted the sigil stone, now dull, save a faint inner glimmers, if resting before one final blaze. He spoke quietly. The portal to paradise would open within Cloud Ruler's hall at his command. When it did, the prisoner must step through, bearing no illusion of return without Cameron's defeat. The prisoner nodded, as they always had, accepting that the path ahead fell beyond reckonings of survival. Preparations began. Floors were cleared, chalk circles etched in geometry stolen from Donera towers. Mages in gray stoles ringed the chamber, each assigned a syllable of continuous chant to maintain tonal stability. Joffre posted archers in loft galleries, though he knew bolts would fare little versus whatever spilled from the rift if the ritual faltered. Still, caution served discipline. Outside, Brumma's citizens gathered along battlements, watching. Sunrise coat the Gerals in muted rows. Some whispered prayers to Talos, others simply rested foreheads against stone, exhausted yet unwilling to sleep, lest dreams conjure gates anew. Martin waited until the sun's edge balanced on the far crag. Then he lifted the Chimmel Atabal into that ray. The ruby burst with light clear as river ice, scattering prismatic shards across chamber walls. He intoned the final verse translated from the Xarxiza verse that acknowledged neither Idra nor Idra. Dedra but named the space between where myth may be rewritten. The well-kinned stone shattered, releasing fountain of argent sparks. The sigil stone cracked, exuding a crimson vapor that coiled upward to marry the silver. Where vapors joined, a sphere of twilight formed part dawn, part dusk, spinning slow. With deliberate calm, Martin stepped back, sphere elongated, edges folding outward, until a doorway parted the air. Beyond lay a shoreline beneath green sky. Beaches strewn with iridescent shells, and distant spires of alabaster wreathed in. Petals of perpetual sunset. The room held its breath. Martin gestured once. Prisoner sheathed sword, tightened gauntlet straps, and crossed the threshold. The portal rippled, but did not close. Instead it shimmered, stabilized by forces greater than themselves. From the far side drifted faint notes of chimes, oddly soothing, masking the tension that clamped every watcher's chest. One heartbeat, two. Then the prisoner's silhouette disappeared among alien palms whose leaves glowed from within. Martin lowered the amulet, now dimmed to ember. He exhaled slowly. Behind him, Joffre murmured that the breach held steady. A long vigil began, measured not by hourglass but by faith. Faith that a single mortal wandering Cameron's manufactured heaven could overturn a prophecy etched in Daedric fire. Brumma's walls still smoldered. Other gates still scarred the provinces. And within the imperial city, the Elder Council debated whether to recall legions or reinforce. Yet in this mountain keep, dawn and dusk coexisted in balance, waiting. Crisis had shifted from defensive stands to a thrust into the adversary's own impossible garden. Until word or omen crossed that threshold, the realm could only sharpen blades, mend wounded, and hold firm against night. Thus did Martin Septine, once humble healer of Kavach, now wear both crown and cuirass in spirit, not yet in ceremony. He moved among his people one more time before retreating to prayer, offering quiet thanks for courage spent and courage yet demanded. Snow began to fall, flakes thick as goose down, muffling the world. Torches burned steady against the chill, their light reflecting upon freshly mended shields. Somewhere beyond mortal sight lines, in cathedrals built from shaped dawn, the prisoner's footsteps marked new ground. And behind every mountain, in the hush where red sky drained of color, Maroon's Dagon drew breath. Sensing that the next inhalation would bear the scent of either victory or ruin, Cloud Ruler watched, silent and steadfast, as the veil shimmered. Within its hall gateway open, fate suspended like a blade above parchment. All Tamriel, from the salt dunes of Alaka to the coral spires of Strozmakai, felt that pause. A single held note before the chord resolves, a momentary stillness. Before the wheel of constellations resumes its ancient spin, whatever came next would be forged where no mortal law held sway. In a paradise meant to birth unending dawn, yet now trespassed by a spark of night's defiance. Footfalls met sand so fine it shimmered like crushed pearls, which grain warmed despite the gentle breeze that drifted from an unseen horizon. The prisoner now only a silhouette against the rippling threshold that still linked. Paradise to Cloud Ruler Temple took a first unsteady breath of air, scented with myrrh and distant lightning. Overhead an otherworldly firmament arched neither day nor night, but a soft jade hue, marbled with threads of amethyst light that shifted as though guided by an invisible tide. The gentle surf, if surf it was, murmured beyond dunes, flecked with nacreous shells. With every inhale, the place exhaled calm. With every exhale, something beneath that calm whispered warning. Paradise sought to lull trespassers before revealing its teeth, turning inland. The prisoner saw terraces climbing away from the shoreline, broad steps of pale stone, each outlined by hedges whose leaves glowed ember red at their edges, exotic. Trees their trunks as white as bleached driftwood. Their canopies awash in violet blossoms formed avenues radiating from a central path. Birds with feathers of liquid brass flitted branch to branch, but their calls were not songs. Instead, they uttered single syllables at measured intervals, forming a slow, pulsing chant that echoed faintly off the surrounding cliffs. Every sense spoke of careful design, a landscape arranged both for beauty and for guidance and invitation to ascend. The prisoner set out, finding the path firm beneath boots still dusted by Brahma's snow. Occasional paving stones bore etched runes describing thresholds crossed and vows unmade, though the script flowed in reverse along the grain, readable only if one watched in mirrored water. Ignoring these lures to distraction, traveler advanced until the air thickened with floral musk so heavy it seemed to cling like scented dew. Here, at a broad landing where two terraces met, figures emerged. Clad in robes the color of ripe pomegranates, eyes agleam with serene purpose, they bowed not in welcome but in acknowledgement of expected arrival. Their leader, a tall Altmer, whose brass circlet bore the sigil of the dawn, asked in a voice devoid of tension whether the new soul sought wisdom or reward. The prisoner replied simply, "Only passage." A hush followed. The acolytes exchanged knowing glances, then parted without protest, but not without consequence. As they stepped aside, the violet blossoms overhead curled inward, petals turning to ashen curls that drifted downward like spent parchment. The brass-feathered birds fell silent, and the path ahead darkened by an inch of shadow deeper than mere dusk. In yielding, paradise registered a wound. The land itself seemed to sense that one walked its avenues without pledging allegiance. Still, it did not resist. Paradise relied on seduction more than force. Trusting that most pilgrims would falter at subtler snares, the terraces gave way to a grove unlike the coastal gardens. Trees here spiraled upward, with flowing knots of argent sap that pulsed in rhythm with distant surf. Between trunks lay pools of water so still they mirrored not the branches above, but memories. In the first pool, the prisoner glimpsed Kavach burning anew, watched Captain Matthias rally a hopeless line, heard the shrieks of scamps and the crack of falling beams. In the second pool, Brahma's battlements reappeared, soldiers kneeling over fallen comrades while Martin's calm silhouette walked among them. Each vision bore the hallmarks of lived experience, yet added subtle distortions. The flames were more vivid, the screams more personal, all designed to anchor the traveler in regret or triumph, to lodge the mind in the past and keep the body still. The prisoner forced eyes forward until reflections faded behind. Beyond the grove, a colonnade rose, supporting a vault of translucent crystal through which soft light poured in shifting bands. At its center stood a dais of veined marble and a pawn. Its single being knelt Maroon's Dagon's Drymora champion, clad in armor wrought of night-colored iron engraved with glyphs that crawled like living soot. The champion's helm, fashioned into sleek horn ridges, concealed all but cold-lit eyes. A glaive rested across armored knees. As the prisoner approached, those eyes stirred. The champion rose, lifting the weapon with deliberate grace that spoke. Of countless rehearsed cadences, words poised between the two, then fell away. Paradise favored ritual, your steel and will provided the grammar. The first engagement struck like flint glaive carving an arc of obsidian blur, parried by Dedrick longsword scavenged from a lesser foe. No metal struck. Instead, two intentions collided with such force that the air rippled. The prisoner, mortal but tempered by sigil stone fire, moved with measured economy, deflecting, yielding inches, recapturing ground. The champion fought with elegance born of endless practice inside timeless halls, turning strokes into stanzas of a poetry that extolled destruction. Midway through the fourth exchange, a clangor rang so pure that columns trembled, and the glaive shivered down its length. Champion stepped back, helm canting, in acknowledgement of parody. Then, in an act both courteous and cruel, he reversed the haft, planted butt to stone, and gestured forward, passage granted. But blade retained for the next opponent should the mortal survive beyond, as the prisoner stepped past the champions. Silhouette blurred, dissolving into curls of shadow drawn downward into the marble, leaving only the faint scent of resin and charred cedar. Paradise rewarded valor, at least for those it wished later to break, past the colonnade. A steep stairway hewn from red-veined basalt ascended toward spires glimpsed earlier from the shore, each stair engraved with alternating glyphs of dawning. Flame and spiraling night, the steps seemed to grow warmer. The higher one climbed. The midpoint a gate of intertwined vines blocked further progress. Its branches glistened like polished ebony, yet sprouted flowers pulsating with sickly azure. Glow. When the prisoner came within arm's reach, the vines writhed open, revealing not an archway but a chamber of air framed by living wood. Inside stood Raven Cameron, alabaster hair unbound, her crimson robe shedding roseate motes at its hem. She spoke softly, almost sadly, asking why one would carry mortal toil into a realm where toil ended. Why choose struggle over ease when Dagon's new dawn beckoned? Her eyes shone with conviction that paradise freed souls from temporal decay. The prisoner offered no discourse, only forward motion. Raven sighed, lifting hands wreathed in flame that burned cool blue. The duel commenced beneath a canopy of thorned vines that quivered with each spark. Raven commanded sorcery shaped from the heart of first. Gate tendrils of argent flame that curved like serpents, shards of congealed daybreak hurled as crystalline spears. The prisoner answered with steel and the fragmentary ward chants. Taught by Cloud Ruler's battle mages, a whispered syllable that bent fire around a gauntlet. A hand gesture tracing a half circle to deflect a spear into vine walls, where it vaporized in coruscating bloom. Minutes lengthened. Sweat and flame mingled until the chamber steamed with volatile mist. Finally, Raven faltered. A single parry riposted into her guard, point of Dedrick's sword halting a breath from the hollow of her throat. Ow. In that stillness, she laughed, not in mockery, but in recognition of design fulfilled. Paradise required testing, and the prisoner had proven worthy to meet her father. She stepped aside, vines retracting as if ashamed. The summit approached. Spires that from distance seemed alabaster now revealed surfaces of fused soul limestone faces pressed within. Eyes closed as though sleeping in exalted agony. Bridges, fanned out above chasms where rivers flowed upward into the sky, droplets catching emerald light, then descending in silent arcs back to their source. At the spire's heart, a grand pavilion opened upon a courtyard ringed by statues' formations, carved into likenesses of Dedrick princes, each depicted breaking through stone ribcages of kneeling mortals. The pavilion floor bore a starburst mosaic depicting the towers of Mondus inverted, their foundations rising toward a crimson sun. There, On a dais before a tapestry of living flame stood Manker Camoran, robes dyed in gradients of sunset cloaked. A frame lean as ironwood, gilded torque circled his throat. Eyes burned not with rage, but with the serenity of one who has found incontrovertible logic for annihilation. In his hands lay the Mysterium Xarxes, its pages shifting through scripture with lazy authority. He greeted the prisoner by name he should not know, commending resilience, then launched into oration, neither rant nor sermon, but scholarly exposition. Niren's angular momentum rusted by the shackles of Alessia's covenant. Stasis choking the potential of Lorkhan's unfinished symphony, Dagon's flame as catalyst rather than end. Words wove compelling tapestry. Each syllable carried cadence that tugged at the edges of doubt, promising a world without entropies, slow graves, or God's arbitrary ceilings. Camoran held out a hand, flawless, inviting, offering station among the architects of the dawn. Silence answered. In that quiet refusal, Camoran read irrevocable challenge. He closed the Xarxes. The air hardened. Rings of glyphs erupted around the dais. Rotating in counter directions, silver inscriptions spiraling left, red characters drifting right. Camoran rose a foot above the mosaic, robes fluttering in cyclonic drafts. With a sweep of the Xarxes, he conjured spectral wraiths clad in a lied panoply. They descended in arcs of ghost-cold glass. Steel met apparition, each stroke scattering shards of half-remembered lament. The prisoner advanced, sword edge sparking on insubstantial helms that burst into dying starlight. Camoran watched, voice now matching the warbeat, hurling conjurations. Jade shockwaves rippled. Parts of the pavilion floor warped to molten slag, then solidified in brittle ridges. Through each hazard, the traveler pressed, footfalls methodical, eyes fixed on the figure who rewrote reality one phrase at a time. Distance closed to a mere dozen paces. Camoran's measured confidence flickered. He gestured, and columns of quartz shot upward, seeking to impale. Reflex guided a leap onto a rising spire, then a spring forward as it shattered, sword aimed true. Blade met book. The Mysterium Xarxes intercepted with a resonant clang, harder than mithril. Camoran staggered but retained hold. He countered with a backhand strike of unarmed precision. Knuckles sparked hellfire where they grazed breastplate. The prisoner countered with pummel driven into Camoran's midrib, forcing breath from lungs. A second slash carved through robe, drawing ichor that shone silver black. Camoran's cry split into two voices, one mortal, one deeper, Dagon's resonance leaking through cracks in paradise. The tapestry of living flame behind him writhed, revealing glimpses of deadlands inside, scorched plains yearning across the gap. With a final convulsive gesture, Camoran thrust the Xarxes forward, his pages unfurling into serrated wings of glyph. But equilibrium already shattered. Paradise shivered. Sky flickered between emerald and the bruised dread of Oblivion storms. Statues cracked, faces within limestone screaming in sudden awakening. Moron's next incantation stuttered words. Caught between pages, now misaligned by sword gouge. Doh! The prisoner seized the lapse, sinking blade deep into Camoran's sternum. No blood spilled. Instead, pages torn from the Xarxes burst outward, whirling upward like frantic moths before dissolving. Into ember sparks. Camoran's eyes widened, less in pain than in disbelief that perfect logic could falter. His body folded, light draining. He fell without sound, robes pooling like sunset spilled across mosaic. Instantly paradise convulsed. The living flame tapestry guttered, exposing a vortex where deadland skies spiraled into vacuum. Wind howled as equilibrium decayed. The architecture of Camoran's will unable to persist, absent its architect. Bridges crumbled, rivers froze midair, shattering into glass sleet. The prisoner, senses ringing, dashed forward to seize the amulet. Of kings, which had slipped from Camoran's belt at the moment of death, fingers closed around chain. The ruby core throbbed, recognizing mortal blood that carried no divine lineage, yet bore covenant's promise. Behind, the vortex widened. Stone slabs tilted, tumbling into abyss that led nowhere. Time fractured into urgent clarity. Outward path must be found before realm's collapse rendered escape moot. The portal back to Cloud Ruler flickered in memory a shoreline far below. But paradise rearranged itself while dying. Stairways extended to precipices that fell away, terraces slanted, seas of nacre shells boiled dry. The prisoner sprinted amid chaos, leaping gaps, forming faster than thought, vaulting over fissures that belched turquoise fire. At a cliff edge, the land sheared. Below lay the original beach, but twisted, waves suspended mid, crest-like frozen. Sculpture. Wrapped arc around carrion wind drifted shards of shattered tower glass. A flash in peripheral sight, the Dremora champion reappeared. Helm cracked, glaive gone, yet hand extended, gesturing not challenge but direction downward along. A slanted shard of collapsed terrace now bridging to lower platforms. Whether gesture stemmed from honor or the champion's own wish to escape collapse, none could discern. The prisoner bowed briskly, slid along the precarious incline, boots sparking on crystalline grit. Moments blended into a descent both frantic and dreamlike. At last the original shoreline took shape ahead, still intact, though surf now churned in reverse, drawing foam from shore into violet sea. Near the portal's shimmer stood Raven Cameron, hair whipping in cyclonic drafts. She did not raise flame or sword. She merely watched the incoming figure with eyes that held no malice, only weary comprehension. She stepped aside, pressed a hand to her heart, and mouthed a word lost in galepour. Perhaps farewell, perhaps apology. Then she turned toward the unraveling spires. Walking into dissolution with deliberate grace, the portal flickered, frame wavering as paradise's anchors dissolved. The prisoner crossed in a burst of compressed wind. Behind, the shoreline folded like fabric drawn through a needle's eye. With a thunder quiet as dusk, the gate imploded, leaving only a ring of disturbed dust on Cloud Ruler's stone floor. Silence held but a heartbeat before torches roared brighter, their flames leaning inward toward the returned amulet as if drawn by its gravity. Martin Septime stepped forward. Expectation tempered by dread resolved into quiet relief upon seeing the relic. He accepted the amulet, thumb tracing fresh hairline crack across Rubia's scar from Cameron's grip. He thanked the prisoner with a nod that carried weight of both friendship and final request. For ahead lay the last stage neither could delay, Imperial City. The Dragonfires and Dagon's inevitable personal assault, preparations stretched into hours that felt like minutes. Messages flew down ice-coated roads to Brumma's garrison report. Success, request escorts, coordinate with legions poised along the Red Ring Road. Martin donned Tiber's cuirass. Its gold filigree reflected torchlight in rising cadence, almost like breath. Over it he slung a simple blue cloak, the color of Cyrodiil's sky before crisis. Joffer marshaled remaining blades, each sworn to guard the heir's progress, though they knew the cost. The prisoner, scrubbing Paradise's dust from armor, rechecked blade edges dulled against runes and wraithbone. They departed Cloud Ruler at dawn. Descending passes where last week's battle, detritus still smoked beneath falling snow. Brummas. Survivors lined streets, offering bundled bread, rush candles, charms of juniper. Captain Bird saluted with bandaged arm. Scouts he dispatched rode ahead to clear mountain trails. Through Pale Pass the company rode blades, Legion outriders. Martin at center emerging onto Gerald's southern foothills, where spring still slept beneath frost. Waiting for Covenant's verdict. Across the heartlands, the journey became a pilgrimage. Farmers paused, plows to watch dust plume rise as line of riders pass. Children raised wooden swords in shy salute. At every wayside chapel, bells chimed when amulets ruby glinted under sun. Yet sometimes distant thunder reminded that not all gates lay closed. Columns of smoke marred forest canopies, and refugee convoys trudged alongside roads, escorted by guild mercenaries or lone paladins pushing improvised carts. To each Martin spoke a blessing brief, yet potent mere words, easing shoulders bent beneath blankets of fear. 3 days' ride brought them within view of the Imperial City's alabaster curve. From afar, its white stone gleamed, yet closer inspection revealed scars, outer walls pitted by stray artifacts, hurled from minor gates that had flickered, then died before fully forming. Legion tents crowded the Isle's causeways, banners snapping in cold wind, each cohort stationed to guard sectors, where supplies and morale both ran thin. As Martin's party approached, horns sounded a note oscillating between triumph and dread. Gate wardens, recognizing the blade's sigil, swung portcullises high. Inside the city, disquiet reigned. The populace had weathered assassinations, Dedrick incursions, rationing. Now rumors told of a last push prince of destruction himself, poised to stride through the final breach. Shops shuttered, squares emptied, save for priests distributing amulets of the Eight. Yet when word spread that a Septime heir had entered the walls carrying the Chimel Adabal, windows opened, hands clasped in prayer. Somewhere a minstrel struck chord upon lute, notes fragile but resolute. Martin proceeded directly to the Temple of the One, flanked by Joffer, the prisoner, and half a dozen blades. Within the nave, high prefects waited, their eyes rimmed by sleepless vigils before fading dragon fires. The basin flame now guttered at a fraction of former height, licking rim with strands thin as candlewick. They ushered the heir to the altar where an ancient plinth awaited the amulet's return. Martin paused, surveying those assembled, then spoke in quiet, measured cadence. History had led them to threshold. Covenant demanded closure no sword could enforce. But mortal courage, proven across valleys and through realms, could bridge final. Span, he placed the amulet upon the plinth. Its ruby radiance expanded, its filling chamber, ceiling to floor, with auroral webs that danced across frescoes of Akatosh and Alessia. The flame stuttered, flared, then steadied, but did not yet reach its rightful glory. Ritual remained incomplete. Dragonfire ignition required final pronouncement, a merging of blood and spirit. Outside, distant horns blared.
Ouch.
Panes depicting Remen's coronation vibration, not of seismic origin, but of realities, seems tearing. Clouds beyond clear, story windows reddened. Thunder rolled, though no storm gathered. Aides rushed in. 3 gates had erupted simultaneously. On the Green Emperor way east, south, and west, each larger than any minor breach, yet smaller than the great gate felled at Bruma. But their synchronization foretold a single fulcrum, a colossal vortex forming above the Lake Rumari, preparing to descend upon the city's heart. Okedo met Martin on temple steps, armor dented from earlier skirmishes, voice hoarse yet steady. He reported legions diverting to hold lesser gates, but the central breach grew unimpeded. Martin acknowledged, then turned to the prisoner one more task, though none could say what shape it might take once Dagon himself stepped through breach. Together they moved toward the city aisle's center, where citizens already fled toward bridges under guard order. Lightning slashed scarlet across sky. Winds spiraled inward, drawing leaves, banners, even loose cobbles into twisting funnel. At its core, a figure vast and terrible emerged, Maroon's Dagon. Four-armed, skin the hue of molten iron, each tusk-lined grin promising endings. His arrival dwarfed spires. The white gold tower's topmost windows reflected his horned helm, yet he did not stride ashore. He met resistance. A shimmer of golden lattice flickered where barriers still clung to existence, weakened yet unbroken. Martin halted at Plaza Center, amulet blazing. He called to those near Joffer, prisoner, priest, stew to shelter civilians, while he performed final rite. Ascending temple steps once more, he entered nave, where thin dragon fire waited. Outside shook columns. Dust rained. He drew the amulet chain across his palms, murmuring invocation lost since Alessian reforms. Words combining Nedic prayer with dragon's peach syllables, resonant with time itself. Ruby shards of light spiraled upward, linking gem to basin flames, gem to his blood. The cuirass of Tiber, Septim answered, its embossed dragons igniting with gold-white flare. Martin inhaled, exhaled, closed eyes. A sound like distant bells rung underwater filled the nave. Flames leapt. Ruby fissured, pouring light into his chest. His form blurred, edges dissolving into aurora as though he became conduit rather than vessel. Outside, Dagon's claw pressed against barrier, cracks spidered. Inside, a roar of draconic timbre shook walls yet emerged from Martin's throat. Rubric of covenant rearranged. Dragon blood awakening in final instinct. Torches snuffed. Nothing remained but radiance. Witnesses shielded eyes, though closed lids could not bar that brilliance. When light receded, Martin Septime stood transformed, yet not as man. Instead, occupying nave where pews shattered under expanding mass, was the avatar of a Katosh, a dragon wrought of translucent flame and solidified starlight, scales etched with runes older than void, great wings brushed vaulting, sending shards of mosaic raining. The dragon turned eyes galaxies wheeling within obsidian pupils, awared the open sky, then burst through clear story an explosion of stone and glass, sending to meet Dagon amid maelstrom. The prisoner emerged from temple doors into chaos. Civilians cowering behind fallen statues, legionaries rallying bows upward, though their shafts seemed twigs before titans. Above, against backdrop of blood-red clouds, dragon met prince. Dagon swung axe the size of city gates. Vadar caught blow on incandescent talon, sparks raining into lake. Their clash boomed, sonic waves toppling street lamps. Yet for every sweep of Dagon's weapon, Dragon replied with arcs of consecrated fire, each gout striking armor, carving molten grooves that cooled to obsidian. At street level, lesser Dedra poured from peripheral gates, emboldened by their lord's presence. Blades and guards formed shield walls. Priests chanted fortify ward hymns. The prisoner's sword, still singed from paradise, joined a knot of defenders near the foot of the tower, parrying clanfur charges, cutting down flame atronox that detonated in spouts of ash. Through gaps in melee, the sky battle played cosmic ballet, each collision shedding meteors of white-hot ice show, minutes stretched into lifetimes. Finally, Dragon seized Dagon's wrist, twisting godflesh with leverage of inevitability.
Ice!
Clamped over the amulet fragment still glowing within chest cavity, transmutation point where mortal and divine converged. Their dragon fire ignited, not with heat, but with law. The inexorable principle that Covenant restored cannot be sundered by will alone. The blast illuminated heartlands, turning night to noon for a heartbeat. Dagon bellowed, form destabilizing, edges fraying into embers borne by gales screaming outward toward gates. One by one those openings flickered, collapsed, imploding into sparks that drifted down as harmless red snow, as Dagon's silhouette dissolved back into plains of oblivion. Dragon 2 began to wane, flames subsiding into gentle glow. It circled white gold tower once, wings carving thermals that blew smoke clear, then descended, landing upon the temple's shattered roof. A hush fell across city and lake alike. The giant form folded wings, molten eyes dimming. Glassy scales cracked, flaking away into prismatic dust that rode wine down colonnaded avenues. When final shard drifted free, no body remained only. Statue of petrified flame formed into the likeness of a roaring dragon above the temple altar. At its base lay scattered cinders and the broken shell of the Chimel Atabal, its purpose fulfilled. In the plaza below, the prisoner lowered sword, breath frosting and suddenly cooling air. Legion horns rang to signal cessation. Citizens emerged from shadows, gaze lifted in wonder. On distant rampart, Okato removed helm, kneeling in silent salute to both Emperor and Avatar, whose essence had merged and departed. Dawn broke without crimson haze for first time in months. Clouds parted to reveal stars fading into true morning azure. Across heartlands and provinces beyond, remaining gates crumbled to inert stone arches. In the Deadlands, Valkina's war hosts found corridors collapsed, leaving them stranded. Within Paradise, if any shards persisted, they drifted rootless along void currents until snuffed by vacuum of unbelonging. Cleanup began. In Imperial City, healers worked triage among wounded. Smiths repurposed broken sigil shards into inert crystal for memorial lanterns. The prisoner assisted where hands required hauling debris, calming children whose memory of titans would weave nightmares. Joffer oversaw retrieval of what relics survived temple collapse, ensuring the dragon statue remained undisturbed. Scholars of the Arcane University set about measuring magicka saturation, noting gradual return to pre-crisis baselines. That evening, Under soft lantern glow near the still waters of Lake Rumeri, Okado made formal proclamation the Oblivion crisis had ended. Martin Septim, last of his line, had sealed Niran against further incursion through selfless sacrifice. He named blades, legion, guilds, and common folk alike as stewards of the peace won. No crown rested upon his bro-empire henceforth would govern by elder council's caretaking until a new covenant-shaped polity. Applause flowed gentle as breeze, tempered by mourning, yet buoyed by relief. On a quiet parapet overlooking the temple ruin, the prisoner, Joffer, and Captain Bird shared bread and silent memories. None spoke of paradise or dragonfire. Silence honored what words could not frame. At length, Joffer produced a small leather-bound ledger, the annals of the Blade's End, inscribed a final line beneath generations of emperors served. Here ended one age. Here began another, guarded by those who chose duty beyond fear. He offered quill to the prisoner, who declined with a nod. Deeds needed no elaboration beyond living memory. Night fell clear. Overhead constellations spun in patterns unaltered since dawn of Merethic. It seemed newly luminous against darkness cleansed of Dedric taint. Somewhere in the city, a lone pilgrim lit candle, placing it atop wall where dragon dust scintillated. Soon others added flames. By midnight, a river of lights encircled the isle, reflections rippling across calm water, each candle a small testament. That covenant renewed burned not just in altars but in ordinary hearts. Far from lamplight, deep in forests once scorched by stray gates, first crocus of early spring pushed through ash, petals unfolding beneath moon. The land listened to silence absent of distant roars, as though Niran herself exhaled at last. In that stillness, among towering oaks or wind-swept tundra, lingered an after-image of a dragon of light fading into Dawna, reminder that mortal courage had, for a time, worn divine shape, and in doing so, stitched shut the rift that sought to unmake the world. The prisoner hero, unnamed by formal decree, yet honored and whispered, legends rested by campfire on city outskirts before dawn's second light. Beyond tent flap, fresh breeze carried scents of river reeds, cut stone, and early blossom. Tomorrow would call for rebuilding, for treaty, for tending graves and planting seeds. Tonight there was only the quiet crackle of flame and the knowledge that the wheel had turned. Not broken, its spokes reforged by sacrifice. In that gentle creak of renewed motion, one could almost hear a dragon's distant wingbeat fading into myth, leaving behind a realm both wounded and reborn beneath constellations unblinking. Thus the crisis reached its final chord within the Heartlands, its reverberations sliding outward across time. Historians would chronicle dates and decrees, priests would engrave litanies, bards would craft songs whose cadences failed to capture the hush that followed Dagon's fall. Yet for those who stood on temple steps or marched through shattered gates, memory itself sufficed, carried in quiet conversations at hearthside, in careful glances skyward each dawn to confirm the sky remained blue. They understood what must never fade, that when destruction strode upon the earth, it was met not by abstract divinity alone, but by hands that closed upon sword hilts, by voices that spoke simple refusals, by hearts that kept faith through fire. And in keeping that faith, they ensured that tomorrow, whatever storms might gather, would rise beneath a sun their courage had reclaimed. The dawn that rose after the Prince of Destruction's retreat was quiet in a way unfamiliar to imperial city ears. No clamor of merchants unbarring stalls, no bell cadence from harried town criers. Instead, the air held a muted hush, as though the metropolis itself listened for any echo of distant thunder before daring to exhale. Where Maroon's Dagon shadow had loomed only hours before, Lake Rumari now lay glass-smooth, its surface mirroring a pale sky laced with wisps of newborn cloud. In the stillness, a skiff drifted, oars unshipped, bearing nothing but a lone priest of Stendar, who scattered myrrh petals that swirled, crimson against silver water, in widening rings of remembrance. Inside the shattered husk of the temple of the one as yet deemed too treacherous for masons to ascend, High Prefect Astrid knelt upon flagstones, still warm from dragonfire. She placed the shards of the Chimel Adabal upon a linen square, each fragment sifted from dust at the statues, feet by sleepless acolytes. Their crimson facets had lost the steady inner pulse felt for millennia. Now they glowed only when stray sunbeams lanced through broken clear-story glass, briefly catching the jewel shards before moving on. Astrid did not weep. She merely rested, gloved fingertips atop the largest shard as if taking a final pulse. Then, rising, she instructed her attendants that none but sworn vestry would handle the pieces and that they would remain here, beneath the silent stone dragon, until a conclave of all cyrodiilic orders could determine a rite suitable for what had, for a single heartbeat, bridged the mortal and the divine. In the avenue beyond, the prisoner shouldered a dented pail of mortar beside a mason's apprentice half his age. Crumbled balustrades required temporary stitching lest another tremor send marble into the roadway below. He worked without herald, with just another figure in soot-streaked mail. Cheeks scarred by wind and cinder, but those who recognized the set of his shoulders murmured small prayers that history would grant. The unknown hero, at least a name. Whether that happened mattered little to him. The act of turning shattered stone into coarse lines, of balancing each new block with deliberate care, seemed worthy enough labor in a world suddenly able to hold silence again. At midday, the elder council convened in the old council chambers, the larger slick stone hall lost to ceiling fractures. They gathered around a semicircle of unpolished oak tables borrowed from the clerk of archives, daylight falling through arrow-slit embrasures, rather than the shattered dome above the central forum. Silks and jeweled circlets had given way to wool wraps and soot-dappled boots. Their first motion, proposed by Chancellor Okato, recorded the council's unanimous acceptance of regency until such a time as an heir proven of the dragon blood, or a lawful succession otherwise ordained, shall ascend. The words felt thin, on parchment, yet carried an urgency born of raw survival. Provinces reeling from months of Dedrick, incursion could not endure a vacuum in which old rivalries rekindled like dry thatch. The second motion addressed material need, road repairs, levy remissions, ration caravans to farm holdings whose granaries had burned. Debate flickered, but never caught. The crisis had scoured agendas clean of petty contest at least for this season. Each signatory left wax seals unadorned by the usual flourishes, concluding with a simple emblem of the White Tower half-shaded to mark loss and resilience alike. By evening, courier ravens fanned across the provinces bearing scrolls that, though mundane in charter, testified to a fragile promise. The heart of the empire still beat in the ruined districts or Baradam. Green Emperor Way, the southern sweep of the market cleanup progressed by lantern light. Crates of charred timbers were hauled toward the waterfront for eventual dumping beyond Channel Shoals. Small stillness lingered in every exchange of tools. Carpenters handed chisels silently. Smiths reattached iron lamp hooks without banter. Grief had not yet found language. Those who had escaped death moved as if unsure the world would continue to admit them. Night brought its own labors. Over the Red Ring Road, a procession of silent carts rolled, each bearing the draped forms of fallen blades or legionaries toward a makeshift field reliquary on the Arboretum's western lawn. A priest of Archay inscribed each beer cloth with chalked runes, name, cohort, date of death, the dragon symbol in miniature. When a body had no surviving companion to offer testimony, the chalk simply read, "Unknown, loyal unto silence." Torches flickered above rows that grew beyond counting, soft orange halos stippling the darkness until dawn washed them pale. Beyond the aisle, across bridges slick with mortar dust, rumors traveled faster than any dispatch. In Way, a blacksmith declared she had seen the dragon statue's light blink twice after dusk and omen. She insisted that Martin's spirit remained watchful. In Pell's Gate, an eel fisher swore the moon's reflection now bore faint golden rings tracing the pattern of the amulets, shatter lines. Such stories threaded tavern corners and chapel pews, weaving a folk mythology about the final hours that official edicts could neither replicate nor dispel. Behind the palace's safer, Wing, the prisoner, lingered after midnight by a brazier that hissed with resinous pine. Nearby, Joffre conferred with Oketo over parchment maps pinned by knife hilts two low barrels. They spoke of Blade's postings in a world where gates no longer needed guardianship, of Thalmor emissaries in Somerset whose own agents observed empires. Weakened sinews of rumors that reached clans debated whether to renew old claims now that legions thinned. The Grand Master's graveled voice never rose, yet each syllable carved new anxieties into the future's wet clay. As the prisoner listened, he understood. Victory purchased dawn, not peace. Peace would require as many silent acts of vigilance. As any battle waged beneath blood-red skies, weeks lengthened. Muscleboats resumed plying Topol Bay. Caravans carrying Blackwood game hides rattled across newly patched causeways. In Anvil, Countess Malona Umbranix hosted a day of clear horizons, where fisherfolk who had survived Deadland storms cast wreaths into calmer seas. In Skingrad, choirs sang the litany of restoration, its final verse rewritten to honor Martin rather than Riemann. Across guild halls a new custom emerged, when a messenger entered. The hallmaster struck a bronze bowl on stones. Rising afterward would be measured against the memory of Dragonfire's roar to remind all present of duty's cost, yet not all provinces healed at equal pace. Hammerfall's desert passes remained choked with glassy slag where minor gates had collapsed, turning trade caravans back toward riskier coastal routes. In Black Marsh, Argonian village seers reported thin spots in the hissed dreamroot places, where memories of the Deadlands still echoed. Mages' Guild chapters dispatched small cohorts to monitor anomalies. Though without the Xarx's malefic instruction, Daedric apertures appeared to stay sealed, still pockets of warped magicka lingered. In fault lines and grottos, burbling crimson wisps that twisted insects into glassy husks. Battle mages marked each hazard with chalk sigils, vowing to return when grander problems no longer consumed council agenda. Remnants of the mythic dawn also proved resilient. Without Comoran's guiding calculus cells frayed, yet fragments of doctrine remained potent enough to ensnare minds already staggered by grief. 2 months after Dagon's banishment, a courier traveling Blackwood Flats vanished. Investigation uncovered a dawn-pink leaflet quoting the Xarxes. When the dragon sleeps, the mountain dreams of flame. Legion pathfinders torched the surrounding. Fen square out of caution, but unease stirred. Devotion forged in fire seldom cooled to cold ash. The prisoner joined search patrols, culling symbols carved into cypress trunks. Quietly correcting maps to indicate shrines, yet undiscovered. It was in such low, persistent labors that the next phase of recovery took hold. The Arcane University established a reparation conclave, inviting restoration adepts from High Rock to collaborate with Dunmerry tonal architects. Their first success, reweaving damaged wards about the prison. District 2 expunged residue that made walls bleed ochre at dawnlight. Scholars noted that magicka itself felt slightly different, thicker in flow, slower to spark. One hypothesized that the temporary breach had nudged Niren's resonance toward a new fundamental frequency, a phenomenon akin to retuning the world's harp. Whether that alteration would mature into fresh spellcraft techniques or subtle constraints none yet dared guess. The clergy confronted a subtler metamorphosis. With the Dragonfire's extinguished trilete, only in Martin's metamorphosis, and then, lost as he transcended Canonus, debated whether Akatosh viewed the barrier as permanently self-sustaining, his avatar having woven something stronger than ritual flame, or whether another covenant awaited forging should next era's crisis arise. Scribes drafted treatises titled On Dragonblood Sands Vessel, sparking disagreements, polite but intense. Pilgrims arrived at the dragon statue to leave offerings, shards of colored glass, sprigs of mountain juniper, folded prayers recounting small salvations. Over time, the marble steps up to the ruin wore concave beneath so many kneeling knees, until stonemasons petitioned to lay brass root plates, lest the foundation crumble under devotion's weight. Years pressed forward, as the fourth era was declared in cloud rest, far from the capital. When an aging Somerset scribe published an ephemeris claiming celestial meridians had shifted precisely enough on the night, Martin ascended that the Culpa's ancient cosmic wound was measurably mitigated. Whether scholars accepted that court of cosmology, the practical impetus felt apt. The empire had crossed a threshold older even than dynasties. 3 years into that new counting, the Elder Council's regency foundered under regional squabbles. Countess Nerina Carvain of Brumma and Jarl Skald of Falkreth each contended that provincial levies dispatched to Seratal still awaited promised reparations. Rumblings surfaced that only a crowned figure could rebind the fracturing shell of central authority. It was then that General Ditchiness of the Colovian estates advocated for Titus Mede, a Colovian warlord whose garrisons had shielded northern holds from Reachment raids during the worst of the crisis. Though no one claimed Mede bore dragon blood, his legion's loyalty offered a bulwark precious against escalating border frictions. In Frostfall of 4E17, the White Gold Tower opened its gates to Mede's column. The contention was brief. Many councillors capitulated without debate, citing stability above lineage. On the day of his coronation, Titus Mede entered the temple district to kneel before the dragon statue. He placed a wreath of tanna leaves at its base, and according to palace diarists, murmured a vow not to outshine Martin, but to guard the peace his sacrifice had purchased. Observers noted the statue's obsidian pupils flared in sunrise. Whether by reflection or omen, none could say. With new emperor installed, Cato withdrew from politics, retiring to an abbey near the Strid and spending his final years copying manuscripts recounting the crisis. The Blades, still under Joffrey's provisional command, awaited imperial confirmation of their old privileges. Mede, wary of any sword at his back not answerable directly to his throne, ratified the order but trimmed budgets, ordering many posts, reallocated east to reinforce borders with the resurgent Aldmeri Dominion. Joffre acquiesced, though he retained a select circle for shadow work watching mythic cults, investigating whisper of necromantic research in Falkrith Sparrows, tracing a thread of rumor that Thalmor scholars sought fragments of the Mysterium. Zarx is said to have reified a cinders near the crushed sigil stone kept deep in university vaults. The prisoner, his name by now penned in several private ledgers though rarely spoken public, took no station at court. He accepted a simple charter as agent extraordinary, answering to the Grand Master alone. The agent traversed high rock resecuring. Archive towers once exploited by mythic dawn, covered in Glenumbra, moors a trove of dawn-pink scrolls sealed within bagoke chests. Each scroll inscribed with incomplete sigil arrays that, when plotted, pointed to a calculus suggesting paradise. Had been only one of several pocket realms Cameron sought to sew along near in seams. These findings he deposited in silent archives where parchment locks bore dragon clasps. Sealed by oath words absent from the common tongue, not all aftermath unfolded upon scrolls and council floors. Households across Tamriel contended with subtler inheritances. Children born within a year of Dagon's retreat often prattled of fire rivers, in dreams until age carried visions away. Some smithies found iron smelted during that red season bore faint magnetic hum, reacting to moon phases. Alchemists reported that certain night-blooming lilies harvested from Deadland's scorch zones gained mild restorative properties when macerated. Though overdoses produced delirium wherein patients claimed to smell bitter ash once more, debate raged as to whether such anomalies were blessings, curses, or merely the world adjusting its humors after violent fever. In Coral, a new guild arose, the Quiet Logio, composed of scribes and mapmakers dedicated to recording every memory. Of the gates, while witness accounts still lived, they adopted a vow, forbidding dramatic embellishment, insisting that the plainest recounting of horror sufficed. Their archives swelled. Woodcut prints of obsidian towers, field sketches of sigil runes scrawled by traumatized farmers, ledgers itemizing livestock lost to stray flame Atronox. The Logia's master concluded that memory alone guarded against cycles of complacency. He appended to every volume a single phrase: "When ruin knocks, recall the price of ignorance." Elsewhere, art answered tragedy with creation. A Breton sculptor carved a series titled Shards of Fire, Slender Marble. Columns cleft by spiraling cracks gilded in copper leaf, displayed in Chadeen Hall's reopened North Plaza. Crowds stood among them at dusk, watching sunlight crawl through fissures until each pillar glowed like embers banked under ash. Some visitors wept. Others left carnations in cracks, petals burnt by copper's oxide, but still vivid. Time moved. In fits and starts, as history often does after calamitous pivot, by 4E29 orchards near Skingrad bore normal fruit yields. The Gold Road's paving stones had been reset, though some retained faint scorch patterns forever embedded like branching lightning fossils. Students at the Arcane University, most too young to remember the crisis except through second-hand tales, now recited the Dragon Ascendant lecture as required in tree-level metaphysics. They tended to treat Martin Septime's sacrifice with reverence, colored by distant abstraction, the way one speaks of Riemann, Cyrodiil, or Alessia. Professors countered by ushering them to the Arboretum at midnight, instructing each novice to place hand upon the dragon statue's cold claw and listen. Beneath stone, one lecturer whispered, is silence louder than any lesson I can teach. Remember how near the void once came. In that same year, the prisoner returned quietly to Bruma for the first time since the Great Gate's fall. Snow grains scudded across the courtyard where once a crimson maw had seethed. No trace of the portal remained, save a slight discoloration in stone, as though heat had etched a ghost halo impervious to lichen or ice. Captain Birdnow, commander of a smaller, leaner garrison, met the visitor with a clasped forearm, neither speaking names. They toured memorial plinths under ridge pines. At one, bearing the effigy of a young militia archer who died closing a secondary gate, the commander knelt, brushing wind-driven snow from engraved lines already softening with age. The prisoner added a fresh sprig of mountain juniper, tying it with thread of crimson cloth kept since Kvatch. Words, again, felt superfluous. Later, in the tap room of the jerkin-smelling sanctuarian, a wandering bard sang a slow ballad titled The Broken Ruby. The melody wove minor chords with a refrain describing a nameless wanderer bearing stone through red storms, finding dawn beyond blood. Few patrons knew the tale intimately, yet everyone fell silent when the final verse held on a long, unresolved note. Bird's gaze met the veterans across firelight. They shared half-smiles at liberties typical of traveling minstrels. Still, when last note died and coins clinked into the bard's bowl, one could sense that some truths, though warped by songcraft, kept vital heartbeats alive. Even as hearts healed, politics advanced. In Somerset, ascendancy of the Thalmor introduced new diplomatic frost. Envoys arrived in Imperial City wearing sea-glass green robes, offering formal condolences for the crisis, while subtly chiding that divine miscalculations allowed such incursion in the first place. Their letters couched in elaborate courtesy, hinted that a Dominion stewardship over arcane matters might avert similar disasters. Okato's successor, a sharp-tongued counselor named Fortunata, responded with curt assurances that the Empire managed its own wards. Yet behind closed doors, Guild Archmagi acknowledged that Thalmor scryers traced Dedric's signatures as deftly as any Imperial seer. An undercurrent of rivalry, once academic, stiffened into strategic contests, quiet but ready. Within this climate, the Blades found their mandate questioned. Some counselors argued that standing army detachments could monitor cult resurgence cheaper than an order of sword scholars answerable only to ancestral oaths. Joffer, aging yet unbowed, traveled to Anvil to petition for continued funding, emphasizing covert intelligence the Order supplied on hidden threats. He carried with him transcripts of Mythic Dawn splinter meetings intercepted near Leowina, ambiguous proof that zeal seldom dies with its prophet. The council granted partial reprieve, but budget lines narrowed. Outposts in Valenwood closed. Archives moved from Frostcrag Spire to more modest vaults under Pale Pass. The prisoner accepted assignment overseeing these transitions, cataloging texts, sometimes burning those replicating sigil sequences too dangerous to archive. Flames flickered blue as each page. Curled memories surrendered to prevent repeating calamity. By 4E40, an entire generation had grown, never seeing a gate, yet nightmares lingered. Physicians in Kavach recorded a slight but persistent cluster of night terrors among children between 6 and 8 winters. Each child reported visions of a sky opening teeth wide. Folk healers prescribed moonmoth balm. Chantry priests whispered Arce's lullabies. Scholars hypothesized genetic memory trauma encoded in community rather than blood. To those who carried real scars, debate felt academic. Still they listened, reminding each other that vigilance springs likewise from the well of memory, however etched. One crisp hearth-fire morning in that 40th year, the prisoner found himself on a lonely hillock overlooking fields east of Anvil, where burnt stumps from minor invasion had long since sprouted green. He sat among new wheat surges, gloved fingers, brushing tops bending in wind. Remembered flames seemed incongruous here, as distant as figments from another life. He thought of Martin's calm eyes beneath the hood that first day at Kavach, of Raven Cameron stepping aside when paradise crumbled, of the dragon's roar dissolving into dawn. These images no longer arrived, jagged but smooth, like creek stones polished by decades of flow. Memory, he realized, does not dull truth, clarifies which edges still cut, and which have become contours one can run a thumb along without bleeding. He stood, shouldered pack, and walked toward the Gold Coast Road, where the sea could just be heard beyond headlands. Behind him, wheat swayed little golden waves across ground once scorched. Ahead, caravans would carry new vintages north, and gossip would swell of border tremors, embassy intrigues. The wheel turned as ever. He found modest solace in knowing its last fracture had been mended not by grand destiny alone, but also by farmers who doused field fires, children who fetched water to cool broken stones, masons who set each block with deliberate care. Tamriel did not require unbroken heroes-only people who, when the sky tore, chose to plant their weight between wound and surrender. Back in Imperial City, the dragon statue still stood, though ivy began to creep into grooves along its wings. Tourists scraped offerings into its claw basins, pearls from Topol, carved bone fetishes from Solstheim. Single feathers of the rare brasswing gull said to have returned after crisis storms ceased. At equinox, a child from Leowyn placed a tiny clay figure at the statue's base. A dragon flanked by 8 candles, no parent prompted. The ritual had grown by common instinct. The next dawn, priests collected the figure for temple archive, noting simply, "Maker unknown, purpose clear." Cloud Ruler Temple, wind-scoured yet structurally sound, remained an outpost of honored silence. Among its dragon embrasures, a handful of new initiates, Train Khajiit, Breton, Bossamer, twins, none born before the crisis. Yet each taught first lesson by placing palm against ancient stone and listening for hush left by Dragonfire's echo. Joffre, beard now, fully white, watched them spar wood blades under snow-dusted eaves. Beside him the prisoner stood, arms crossed. They shared long look, the sort between old comrades who understand words risk redundancy. Joffre finally spoke. Guardianship isn't a blade, son. It's knowing when the realm still sleeps. And staying awake anyway. The prisoner nodded once before returning to the parapet, where valley mists curled, recalling swirling smoke of another age but bearing seeds of next spring, so the Oblivion. Crisis receded into annals ink and stone, melody and prayer. Yet its contours lingered in small daily rituals, candles lit for absent emperors, children taught to read weather's hue with careful regard, smiths tempering iron under char-free sky, yet testing for humming memory. Tamriel learned to live alongside the scar, not as victim, but as steward. For scars, after all, speak of what body endured, and also what it overcame. And somewhere in the interstice, between legend and waking life, travelers on moonless nights swear they sometimes hear a vast wing-beat pass overhead. No tempest in its tail, only a breeze carrying faint warmth of starlight touched by golden fire. They look up to find nothing but constellations, still unblinking, still charting their slow dance across firmament. Yet those who have heard keep the memory close. A reminder that once, when ruin gnawed the world's very frame, a mortal's courage had kindled divine flame. forging shield enough to hold the sky together and usher dawn anew.